All right, I'd like to call to order the January 22nd, 2024 Mountlake Terrace Planning Commission meeting to order. Please take the roll.
Chair Batista.
Here.
Vice Chair Harrison.
Here.
Commissioner Thompson.
Here.
Commissioner Landis.
Here.
Commissioner Betcher.
Here.
Commissioner Stenson.
Here.
Please let it be known that Commissioner Morgan has an excused absence for tonight.
All right, moving on to the next agenda item, approval of the January 8th, 2024 meeting minutes. Does anybody have any changes or corrections to those minutes? I'm not hearing or seeing any, so we'll go ahead and declare those accepted as presented. We have a little change in order tonight, so we're going to start off with the director's report.
All right, thank you. I wanted to fill everyone in kind of what's happened since our last meeting when we had unwanted comments, I guess I'll call them, from some individuals at public comment. The next day, we started to research this with the city attorney, and also this has happened to other cities and folks around this area. So part of what we were trying to track down was from a legality standpoint of having public comment available, what we could and could not do. And so that's very important. But we got the go-ahead for remote comments on Zoom that the city can require registration. It needs to be done at least 24 hours in advance, with the hope that with names, usually the names are not real, and, you know, people can make sure that they can't get traced. But so for us to basically be able to go and make sure that the name is legitimate and the email is legitimate for somebody, it doesn't mean that we'll never have somebody get on online and do something, but now we know how to cut them off. Apparently it's a couple-step process, and so that's what was happening last time, where we kept hearing somebody go just because we weren't prepared for it. But now we know how to cut those comments off. So the city released twice information via the city's social media and other means of denouncing what was done at the Planning Commission, and it also happened at City Council. And then the city also released last week the requirement to register for online comments, which is in place. And then as of today, one of the things that I had requested was that we had some verbiage for the chairs or vice chairs for all boards and commissions that take open public comment, that they have something available to them as far as something in writing that they could utilize. And so what the city came up with is no person shall make personal attacks or threatening remarks while addressing, you know, fill in the blank board, which disrupts, disturbs, or otherwise impedes the orderly conduct of the meeting. Any person who is engaging in conduct that disturbs, disrupts, or impedes the business of said group, or comments have been ruled out of order by the presiding officers, shall immediately cease and refrain from further improper comments or improper conduct. All hate speech will be construed as threatening remarks. So this is, Chair Batista asked that that be put on our agendas, that verbiage, which we can definitely do as far as our public comment portion. It seems that nobody's showing up in person to do these things. Of course, it's all done, you know, on Zoom and in other electronic means. So we're hoping with some safeguards in place that we can stop these actions. I also received an email from Commissioner Harrison asking, you know, is it okay for the Planning Commission to potentially denounce this officially, and that's something for you guys to discuss as a board. If you want to do that, it's perfectly acceptable that you do that if you decide that you want to do something like that as well. So I just wanted everybody to know that the city takes it serious. I take it very seriously. We will not be conducting our meetings in such a manner ever. I told somebody I was ready to throw down in the parking lot today if need be. And I'm serious about that because we just won't tolerate it, period. And so hopefully we'll see with these things if it stops, and I'm hoping that it will. And if not, then we'll take other actions to make sure to see what we can do to make it stop. So that's kind of where we're at. So I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have about it, or if you have any additional questions or anything like that this evening. But I just wanted to kind of fill everybody in what's happened in the last 2 weeks since we met last time.
More of a procedural. In this case, the presiding officer, chair or whoever's running the meeting, as soon as they say, I'm going to rule you out of order, will then staff mute that person's mic immediately? So
Yep.
There isn't.
Yep.
I don't have to say.
Yep.
You're out of order. Please mute the mic. As soon as I say you're out of order, they're.
Boom, Shannon's on it.
They're
There, she's doing what she needs to do, or who's ever presiding as the secretary or the clerk or whoever, people are going to get cut off.
Okay.
They were a little bit more prepared at council just because we had discussed it, and were anticipating that maybe something would happen, but that happened a couple days after we had met. And so we were still trying to get our ducks in a row. So they were able to handle it a little bit better than for us. It was kind of like, whoa, came out of nowhere. So anyways, so everybody's aware of it. Not all boards and commissions take virtual public comment, but the ones that do, everybody's following the same protocols and procedures at this point.
And then, since I literally just said this when I was talking to Christy before the meeting, but now that we're in the meeting, I'll say that. When there is somebody signed up for comment, either in person, here in person, or if it's online, then I will probably read the statement verbatim before public comment starts, as an additional reminder. It's like, hey, these are our standards. You may get cut off if you step out of line, but like tonight, there's nobody here for public comment. There's nobody signed up online for public comment. There's nobody online.
Right.
I'm not going to go through and say this.
Right, exactly.
When there's not going to be
Sure,
any public comments.
sure.
Because it's a paragraph. So
Yeah.
I'll skip it if there's no public comment, but
Yep.
when I check with staff, is there anybody for public comment? They say, that'll trigger me saying that as well.
Yeah, and we'll use, if somebody hasn't registered, they can still make comments in person, they can make written comments. But like I said, what's been done in other areas, these folks aren't showing up. They're not providing written comments. They're just kind of Zoom bombing people with their tactics at this point. So it's part of our policies and procedures now that have been put in place by the city manager. And like I said, we'll see how this road test this and see how it works and if it solves a problem. And if not, then we'll go back and figure out what else we can do as far as this goes. One of those unintended consequences, I guess, of having electronic comment, Zoom, via Zoom or different electronic means.
And correct me if I'm wrong, anything beyond sort of the safeguard that we're putting in, because this was mandated by the state legislature, they would have to amend their code and laws to allow us to maybe not do online public comment at all and only have it be.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. That's kind of where the legal counsel gets involved, and that's why we talked to legal counsel before of like, okay, we can't not allow public comment, right? These are open meetings, And there's, case law older than all of us for that. But when we have these situations, there are means where we're not trying to stop it. We're just trying to make sure that it's appropriate to what people are commenting about that's legitimate, other than some of the other stuff that's going on.
Hence some of the hesitation in the last meeting after that, we first got that comment. It's like not saying something right away. One, in all the years I've been on the planning commission, we've never had to cut off public comment. We very rarely get public comment, and it's never of that nature. But knowing that legally the people have the right to make the comment, I'm sitting there saying, am I even allowed to stop this?
Yeah.
So you guys I'm like looking at staff, trying to get some visual cues and, trying to pick it up. So I'm after talking to them, when we recessed, and glad that we've now got the sign off of the city attorney and the city manager.
Yeah, and the reason I was kind of telling Shannon in 3 minutes, because it's 3 minutes, but also it started out that I was thinking it was going in a different direction, maybe not under the purview of planning commission. I thought it was going to be about Gaza and Israel, and then it took a sharp right turn, and then at that point, it's like, okay, but it kind of started a little different, and that was my hesitation. I didn't know initially where it was going, and then after that first one, it's like, okay, now we're ready for, something that, and even then it was.
Yeah. And unfortunately, some people who are making public comment aren't doing anything negative, but they're not used to making public comment, so they're not getting to their point right away, or it seems like it's going off in this weird tangent.
Yeah.
And so there's always going to be that hesitation to just automatically cut them off. Right. Because it may be, oh no, it is planning commission related, and oh yeah, it's prevalent and it's not malicious. It's just, where are you going with this? Something still might slip through. This isn't, 100% fail safe, but, once there's that confirmation, it's like, okay, yeah, no, you're out of line, then we can cut it off. So unfortunately, it still will require giving them some leeway until there's some type of, confirmations, like, okay, yeah.
And I would also say, if somebody's providing comment, because it also says disrupt, where the chair is seeing that, hey, this is not pertinent to something in the city, or pertinent to planning commission purview, then by all means, I think it's acceptable to say, hey, could you please, make your comments, address your comments to something that's pertinent to the city or to the planning commission business, if somebody's kind of wandering maybe a little bit. But yeah, it's kind of a fine line. I'm hoping that some of these measures are going to curtail it. I know that some of the other cities have put things in place, and it seems to be helping this situation. So like I said, I think they thought the planning commission was city council to begin with. But we'll see what they're up to. All right, and I don't really have a lot more for planning commission. I know that we have a lot to do here for comp plan update. So anyways, but I just wanted to talk about that before public comment, but it doesn't look like we have public comment, but I'll let the chair proceed.
And then I'll say too, just following up on the director's report item, after we get to the end of the meeting, before we go into miscellaneous business, I'll maybe check one more time with planning commissioners. Maybe something came up during the course of this meeting that raises a question in your mind for staff. I'll double check one more time before we move into miscellaneous business to see if any other questions.
All right, that's great.
For the planning director. Okay, so moving on to item number 5, public comment. Just double checking one more time. We have nobody online wishing to make a public comment?
There's no one in the online audience at this time.
All right, let the record show no one is here in person, so we will go ahead and move on to item number 6, holding a vote for the chair and vice chair. So
Let's jump into that.
So normally,
Free
so
for
this
all.
is the one time where normally the chair will not look for the motions. This, usually staff will, at least run for the first part for chair. But, I can start it off, we'll start off with the chair, Would anybody like to make a motion for somebody for chair?
I'd like to make a motion for Chair Batista.
All right. And would anybody like to nominate anyone else?
Is anybody secretly hoping to be chair of the planning commission and need someone else to nominate them? I second Chair Batista.
Me too.
Okay, not hearing any other nominations. I have a motion and a second for chair. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. So Commissioner Batista will be the chair for the next year. Feels weird to
That's
so for the third person. That's normally why the chair doesn't do this part.
That's okay.
Okay, so the next part of this is opening up nominations for vice chair. Would anybody like to make a motion for vice chair?
Isaac, do you like being vice chair?
I'm happy to pass it on if anyone else wants to try it.
Well, what if we want you to be vice chair?
Let's play a game of hot potato, and
Yeah.
the loser
1,
gets
2,
to be
3,
the
hot
vice
it.
chair.
I will say historically, it has been a game of not it. Most people don't want to be chair. And back in the day when the chair would be absent, not frequently, but, on a semi-regular basis, it was all, everybody kind of looking at each other's, I don't have to run the meeting, do I? Do you have to? Please, vice chair, show up. Please, vice chair. Show up. So that's not necessarily the case these days, but it's a great learning opportunity, especially getting in the habit of, making those motions as we had in the last meeting, 3 public hearings. So it's good training for everybody, but, I don't want to bend anybody's arm, but technically we do need a vice chair, so.
I would just say, I don't know if it's wise for me to do it, because I could be absent a little bit more frequently with the new baby showing up. So just,
And that's fine, because normally, one of us will be here, so, knock on wood, saying that. So it's, if, I guess before we have a motion, we don't have a second yet, so I would say, you're willing to do it or pass it along. You're willing to take it on if there's no one else? Or?
no, I was saying it's probably not a great
Not a
time
great
for
idea.
me to do it, because
Gotcha.
I could be absent
So-
more often.
Gotcha, that
So this is like an
Maybe like
anti-camp.
next year.
This is anti-campaigning.
That's a new strategy.
I'd be more than happy to do it
Did we already
next
nominate
year.
Isaac?
When,
I don't think I nominated Isaac. I can formally nominate Isaac before it falls to me, or whoever draws the short straw. I nominate Isaac.
Okay, I have a motion for Commissioner
Commissioner
Harrison
Harrison.
to be vice chair. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second for Commissioner Harrison to be vice chair. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Congratulations.
Hearing none. That motion carries, so we have a chair and vice chair for the next year.
And thank you, you guys, too.
Yes.
You are welcome. So normally the stuff runs like clockwork, but then we have meetings like last time, so where we get interesting public comment and 3 public hearings, so. So yeah, definitely a lot of balls to juggle in the air sometimes, so. Okay, so moving on to item number 7, comprehensive plan update.
All right. Good evening, Chair Batista, Vice Chair Harrison, members of the Planning Commission. Jonathan Morales, Senior Planner. I'm joined today by Sierra Carson, our consultant from OTAC, helping us with the comprehensive plan update, and they'll be presenting with me today. First, let me share my screen. That'll be helpful. Oops.
Well, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me all right through the online?
Yes.
Fantastic. Had a bit of audio issues last time I attempted to do this virtually. Disappointed to not be in person with you all tonight, but feeling a bit under the weather, so we'll be presenting virtually today.
Okay. All right, so today we're hosting our second formal Planning Commission briefing as part of the comprehensive plan update. You'll remember we presented to you on December 11th. This was following the SEPA scoping open house that was held November 13th. Okay, so today's agenda, we're going to present a plan introduction outline. So this is an overview of what will be in the comprehensive plan introduction. So there's 4 segments of this introduction. Secondly, there's a element outline and goal and policy review matrix and planning commission schedule that will be presented by Sierra. And then review a framework of growth alternatives that will be studied in environmental impact statement. So number 3 is really the bulk of this conversation today. So I'm going to briefly run through the plan introduction. Weird. We had some visuals that are not appearing. Oh, okay, there we go. So the plan outline again, today we're reviewing the outline for the introduction. So 4 segments, there's a community vision section, community profile, purpose and scoping of a comprehensive plan, and then planning process and public participation. In subsequent meetings, there'll be an opportunity to review the actual plan elements in more detail. So there's a meeting in February that will go over the land use, housing, and economic vitality elements in more detail. So that will be discussed at a later date. So community vision. So what will be included as part of this section in the comprehensive plan? So firstly, it's our vision for Mountlake Terrace in the year 2044. Again, we're planning within a 20-year horizon from 2024 to 2044. So this vision statement is shaped by community input in the form of a community visioning survey and additional engagement opportunities, as well as knowing the growth that we need to be planning for, how the policies and goals that we develop help to achieve those requirements as part of the Growth Management Act. Secondly, the community vision is founded on community values. So what are the foundational overarching values that are important to the community, and how the goals and policies throughout the plan support these values, and then how the community engagement through this process help shape these values. So the existing vision, which is here on the right of the screen, this is out of the June 6, 2022 City Council Goals and Vision document. So this is actually an improved form, an improved vision statement than what's currently in the comprehensive plan. So right now there's a community vision in the community livability element that was updated in 2017. So this vision statement's from council, adopted in 2022. So just as an aside, you should have received 2 attachments today. There's a community profile attachment and survey results. We won't go in depth today on those documents, but they're for your own reference for future meetings that provide an overview of the community visioning work that we did, survey analysis and evaluation of that. So again, we wanted to vet this vision statement through a community process in the form of the visioning survey that we held between July 3rd to November 30th. We received 268 comments in this survey. And so one of the questions that we asked in the survey was, how well does the existing vision statement align with your view of Mountlake Terrace in the future? So we had a majority that stated accurately represented their view of Mountlake Terrace. 39% said somewhat reflected their view of Mountlake Terrace, 5% said it did not, and then 10% left this question blank. A lot of the questions weren't required, so for the most part, we got about 85% response rate to the survey. For respondent to answer does not align with my view of Mountlake Terrace. Many of the comments were related to housing and had some conflicting viewpoints, but we wanted to summarize them here. So for example, some of the respondents want to see more mixed-use housing and housing that's included for all, example, affordable housing. Other respondents want to maintain the single-family homes structure in the area and see less housing with more restaurants and retail stores in its place. Others who did not feel that the vision statement aligned with their view of Mountlake Terrace expressed dissatisfaction with the high cost of utility bills, specifically water, lack of parking, and lack of walkability. A respondent who answered somewhat describes my view of Mountlake Terrace in the future. Had comments related to concerns about lack of housing affordability, lack of parking, crime in the area. They also felt that there could be improved access to grocery stores and quantity of grocery stores, restaurants, and other local businesses. Many respondents who answered accurately describes my view of Mountlake Terrace in the future, commented relating to the city not yet having fulfilled the existing vision statement, but that they do support this statement as a future goal. Expressing concerns about housing affordability. Again, this is a very common theme throughout these responses. So I wanted to pause here before I go into the community profile. Here's our vision statement. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, but wanted to pose a question and get your input as far as, does this vision statement still reflect the future of Mountlake Terrace in 2044?
I'll just jump in real quick. So I know especially, that this is the vision statement by City Council, and, specifically calling out the town center. We're not too far removed from, doing the town center plan update again. Town center is key to the city, but I know even as part of this process that we are looking at other sub-areas that either have just as equal amount of importance or actually have more existing commercial importance right now than what the town center does. So I don't mind the town center being listed there. I feel like we're singling it out when maybe it should be more of a comment, referring to all the neighborhoods, or at least all the commercial nodes, or something that we're not just focusing on the town center, because in reality, while we want the town center to be a magnet, there's a lot of people in the city who won't make the town center an everyday part of their lives, but will make those commercial nodes closer to them in the other sub areas as part of their life. So, and I know obviously here we've been advocating for decades to focus on the other sub areas as well, and we have now started to do that. I think it's important to somehow have that included in the vision statement, either by not just singling out town center and just being all neighborhoods, or actually listing them verbatim, which might be a little bit of a mouthful. There's no harm with the way it is. It's just, I don't want it to make it seem like we're overlooking, other areas that might honestly have just as much commercial development as the town center will in the future.
Sure.
So what if, and I mean, this is something for council to discuss, but what if there was some verbiage that talks about a vibrant commercial sub-areas providing job services, entertainment, and activities?
I think
maybe a city of complete neighborhoods. I think my critique, and I've probably brought this up before of this statement, is it's very long. I would think a vision statement like, so there was a former city manager who once made a statement I read in a news publication somewhere. They said, Mountlake Terrace is a city for families. I think the city of Auckland, New Zealand, had this long process, and they said Auckland is the most livable city on earth. Like, I think something a little bit punchier and shorter, and maybe it doesn't have to be like a 6-word statement where the first 3 words are Mountlake Terrace is. But I do think there's kind of a lot of like weight placed onto this single beam of our vision statement here. Like, and it gets a little bit detailed. So I'd like to see it a little bit more general, like, Mountlake Terrace is a place where people can live thriving lives their entire life. Or, there's a lot of things we could do. And maybe this is obviously like, reworking this is obviously a job, right? Like, we're not going to solve it here tonight. But I would like to see it a bit shorter, and I would like to see it a bit more like, there's other visions. Like, I think there's like, this is like level 2, and level 1 is like the shorter thing I think I'd like to see.
And I think, I like that idea, and I think that while, hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn, people on the planning commission, people on the city council, they understand the context behind these words. We understand what, the theories of complete neighborhoods and complete streets and Vision Zero and all, all these other things. The average person who reads this statement doesn't know that and is probably never going to read the comp plan. So what I would like to see is like, we have the statement, and, the comp plan will usually tie back into the statement. It's like, hey, this is what we were envisioning our future streets to look like, or our future commercial nodes to look like, and this is how it feeds into that statement. 95% of the population isn't going to get to that part of the comp plan to understand that, but shorter, punchier, and then but it's supported with what that actually means, in the comp plan. Okay.
Yeah, and I think other cities do this, like maybe it's, not as pithy as a motto, like Bothell is like, hell for a day or a lifetime, right? Like, if it's the first 3 letters of the town sign burnout. Edmonds is like, it's an Edmonds kind of day. I don't know, Mountlake Terrace, thrive for life or something. Like, maybe it's longer than a motto, but it's kind of more motto-like than like a directive.
So I have a question. So is this a community vision specific to the comp plan? And then we could have a separate, like, altogether thing that's the city motto, right? Like,
Yeah.
Maybe they're 2 separate entities altogether. And this doesn't need to be the short, succinct thing. This can be, this is what we want to be on a grander scale. But also, we're the city of good neighbors, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's a separate thing.
I think it should be longer than a motto, but I don't know, my general sense is this is just kind of like, if you have to take a breath to say the sentence of what the vision statement is, like, it could probably be shortened a little bit.
Well, what do you guys think about shortening it a little bit? I mean, if we're getting our hands dirty, then let's get our hands dirty and get to it.
If this was on social media, I'd say, oh, that's probably cool, and keep on scrolling. I bet you I just scrolled past something good.
So maybe get down to the meat of what's important in this and craft a vision around it, and maybe take out some of the stuff that.
Yeah, like if we could work the bold statement, like each of the bold statements are like 5 to 7 words long. If we could like find a synonym for them that's like 1 or 2 words long. And I think we've already said that the vibrant town center providing jobs, services, entertainment, and activities needs to be expanded to include the neighborhoods, right? Like, so if it was something like complete neighborhoods that allow many kinds of people to live, work, and play there or something. I mean, it's a bit of a cliche statement. Just kind of spitballing here. I don't know what process we want to do to like workshop this, or if this is even the time or place to do that right now.
Well, why don't you start out as a group with the first part of it, which says Mountlake Terrace is a dynamic, engaging, innovative, and welcoming city, and maybe pare down dynamic, engaging, innovative, and welcoming city to a blank city.
We're a great place.
Mountlake Terrace is awesome.
No, I mean, this is the challenge, like, Commissioner Landis highlighted, like, we do actually want to have some, something more than just a pithy staying here that, like, actually means something. And this first one, I feel like the town center providing jobs and economic activities, and then like the safe, connected, and sustainable neighborhoods, like they all kind of, like that's easier to work, but like dynamic, engaging, innovative, and welcoming, what captures all four of those words is a bit challenging for me.
Does the, like looking at it and thinking of other vision statements from other organizations, does it have to be like a paragraph? Could it be like Mountlake Terrace is, and then bullet point dynamic, bullet point engaging, bullet point innovative?
Sure.
Oh, that's good. Like bullet points.
Do you want to talk about that? Do you want to have like because usually also you'll have like a sentence that kind of, or I don't know, I've usually seen like a sentence before bullet points. So like you would, I don't know, just because maybe I have an easier time with it, but I look like, see this, and Mountlake Terrace is a city of complete connected neighborhoods that is ... And I guess I hope that the vision statement doesn't become Mountlake Terrace as a city of complete connected neighborhoods, because I feel like that it needs to be a bit bigger than that, but I think that could be an approach too. How much time did we budget for this today?
You opened up Pandora's box.
I have a question. I guess just, I'm a newer member of the Planning Commission, and I've seen the vision before, but I'm just sitting here wondering, like, how did it get this long? And I feel like it seems like it's trying to address, like, every element of the comp plan in the vision statement. And I'm just wondering, like, well, maybe my first question is, how did it get this long? And then, like, is that the intention to try to address, like, arts, parks and recreation, housing, commercial nodes? Like, it feels like there's a lot that's packed into it.
So a year and a half ago, maybe, a year and a half ago, council was thank you, 2022, was taking a look at what they had for overarching goals for the city, and wanted to have an approach where they were looking for more long-term, mid, and short-term goals before they kind of had 5 goals that they would work on. And they were maybe more pointed than goals. They were pretty specific. So City Council worked on a full Saturday, several hours, and they came up with these goals, long-term, mid-term, and short-term goals. And from that exercise, they crafted a new vision statement during that process. So that doesn't mean that there can't be a community vision associated with the comprehensive plan that varies from that as far as the vision in the comp plan for the next 20-year planning cycle.
So the statement reflects those goals that the city...
Yes, I mean, I think they tried to summarize, and it's a lot of pages of goals, let's just say that. And so I think the attempt was to summarize that in a vision statement.
And if you read the vision statement that's in the comprehensive plan, the current one, it's not too far from what's on here. Mm-hmm. So I think they use that as a basis.
Yeah,
sort of
and then
define,
tweaked it.
For what the future goals are.
This is more of a goals statement. It's aspirational. It's what we hope to be in relatively specific detail. Which I feel, I don't know, maybe I'm getting caught up in the semantics here a bit, which never happens. But the vision, I feel like, is something that is like stems from that, right? Like the goals are this because the community is this. And I don't know if that's a question we can answer or that even goes into the comp plan document. Maybe I'm asking for something that doesn't exist but should. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't have anything after that.
Okay.
It's tough. All of these items, are important, but it's a lot. Right? It's a mouthful. I mean, can the community vision be Mountlake Terrace is ... see the comp plan?
Well, no, I mean, one of the things I've heard people comment on, and I don't know how accurate they are, how representative they are, is that we have challenges with establishing an identity for Mountlake Terrace. Like, what is Mountlake Terrace? Mm-hmm. And I think the vision statement wants to do that. And this is like kind of a bit how we do that through our goals. But what are these goals reaching towards? Other than Mountlake Terrace being a good place. Like the gateway to Snohomish County, that's one thing I've heard. A city of complete neighborhoods. A place to thrive for life. Like all these could be, well, there are more mottos than vision statements, but I feel like it kind of wants to be like, what does the comp plan hope to, in one sentence you can say in a single breath, achieve? So can we distill this statement down into that? And I don't know if I have an answer. It's an observation I have. That's why it's hard. That's why the statement is this long.
Yeah.
Sierra, it looks like you have your mic off. Did you want to say something? Or?
No, I don't have anything to add at this time. I really appreciate discussion from commission on sort of what your thoughts are on sort of how to update and make sure that this vision statement does resonate. Any additions that could help make this statement resonate more with the community. And I think that we can sort of take these comments and feedback from you all today and provide a couple of recommendations that can either come back to you or go to city council as we coordinate with staff.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. In the case of Auckland, I saw this presentation on it several years ago. They actually had like a whole public engagement process that lasted for a long time, and they came up with Auckland is the most livable city in the world. And so I don't think it's something that Planning Commission can solve in one meeting in 10 minutes between presentation items. I think it is something that needs bigger community involvement, but just kind of highlighting that, we might want to make this a bit more succinct.
Sure.
I would just add, you did have 85% of folks saying, hey, we think it fits. Maybe taking what we have, shorten it, and coming back, like Sierra said, with a couple of alternatives for you guys to consider next meeting.
Yeah, like a punchier way to say this in a shorter amount of words.
Yeah. Okay, we'll try to figure out what punchy means to Commissioner Betcher.
Literally punchy. We want a
But
logo
it's
of a
going to be
boxer.
punchy. Okay.
So we do have the attachment for the survey results. There's just an overview, but at a later date, we'll be providing you with a formal summary of the survey, in addition to the overview of responses that we got during the SEPA public open house as well. Yeah. Anything else on this item?
No, I'd say, it makes sense why it took council several hours just to come up with it.
Yes.
I'm assuming it was at their annual weekend retreat.
I believe it was not at the retreat, but don't trust my memory. I think it was actually a special full Saturday that was not the actual retreat, if I recall. But of importance of just thinking through, moving forward in a more proactive way where everything wasn't necessarily either kind of do this task oriented, I guess, and more, hey, let's divide these things up and how we're going to tackle them, because some things they take time, and other things, we can get them done fairly quickly if we focus on them. So that was the attempt, yeah.
Unfortunately, I have an old, almost live sketch running through my head.
Uh-oh.
Mountlake Terrace.
Oh, I don't know that one.
Yeah.
I have
So I'm just
Linwood.
like, ugh. So for those of you who are maybe new to the city or the region, I'll enlighten you off the record.
It's not Linwood Beauty Academy, is it? That's next door.
No, it is different. It was commentary during the John report. So, okay.
That was good. I missed that almost live. I think everybody said it enough. It is too wordy. I don't know, maybe vision statements are supposed to be wordy, but I don't know. I feel like it's not. But here's the thing that gets me is Mountlake Terrace is. Where is the proof that it's dynamic, energized, engaging, innovative, connected?
Yeah, I'm not a big
How
fan
do you-
of buzzwords.
Yeah, how do you substantiate that that's what we are? Or maybe Mountlake Terrace strives to be.
Right.
Yeah, I think that it's a vision statement, so it's not saying it is now. It's
Yeah.
more like, this is the vision of what we would like the community to be, right? So, which is essentially summing up the comp plan. It's not where we are today, but we're looking out at a 20-year horizon. What do we want to be? What's important to us as a community? And how do we get there to that place? And where we feel like we're lacking, then what do we do to meet that vision? So in 20 years, you can look at whatever the vision statement is and say, yep, we're closer to the vision that we had than we were 20 years ago.
And that's kind of what your pie chart said too, that the people who thought it was accurate, they were saying that's what they see us being.
Yep.
Right. And, I'll kind of add on, with some of these items here, it's a frequent theme that I've seen over the years that's always included. It's like a talking point, but not saying it's staff or council, but sometimes it almost seems like, they're resting on their laurels. It's just like, we got great parks, but we can strive to do better. We know we need more parks. We know we need more green space. We know, it's like interconnected in neighborhoods. It's like, what's your definition of interconnected? I would beg to differ. So, it's like we are striving to make these things, these linkages and improve on it. But, I've been seeing something like this or similar for a very long time, and I'm just, it's just like, it could almost have been the same thing 30 years ago. It's just like,
Right.
it's like, yeah, we are, but we're striving to be more.
Yeah, so each of these words in the vision statement is a subject, and over the years, you get a letter grade on the subject. And if you haven't achieved A's by the 20-year mark, you need to go back to school or whatever.
Get your certification back.
All right. Well, we'll take what we heard today, sort of come up with some recommendations that we could present back to you, and also present it to the CPAC group as well. And then go forward with council and see if they have any recommendations. All right, so the second element of the introduction is community profile. Again, there's an attachment which provides an overview of what's going to be included. So it's a narrative description of Mountlake Terrace today, including Mountlake Terrace within the region as part of the Puget Sound region, and then also the Snohomish County region. Historical context, how did Mountlake Terrace begin? How did we get here? So how was Mountlake Terrace incorporated? How did it become to be a city? And then also acknowledging some of the racial exclusion history and redlining that sort of formed the city. That's not currently referenced in the comprehensive plan, so I'm including that in the introduction. Demographics and socioeconomic data, infographics describing community info such as race and ethnicity, age, household types, income, jobs, and commuting trends. And then overview of the city's subareas. So again, town center. But also we're working on our sub-area plans for Melody Hill and Cascade View. For Melody Hill is an update from the 2008 sub-area plan. But we're also not just focusing on those. We want to look at all sub-areas as part of this comprehensive plan update. Let's see if I missed anything.
So I wanted to,
Sure, go ahead.
before we move on, the part about, redlining, I know it's not in this presentation, but it's part of the supplemental documents that you provided, and I know the CPEG group talked about it a little bit, but, and part of this is just a little bit of devil's advocate here, so don't think that, oh, I'm off on an extreme end here. I saw there was a little bit more context with it this time around. The map identified this is the area that had those restricted covenants. In the deeds. It is primarily the original development that occurred before the city was even incorporated.
Right.
There is the picture of one advertisement with a call out saying how that phrase that they use could have, hidden meaning or be a dog whistle. But I would say that advertising back then was a lot different than, what we think of now. And while those deeds were there, can we say for sure that one, that's what that advertising was intended to say? Two, were the restrictive deeds put in there by those developers, and some of whom ended up being sort of the city founders, or was it the banks who required the developers to put it in so the property values wouldn't drop and thus the banks losing their investment capital? Kind of what I'm getting at here is that I know, sort of in, our new environment, with DEI initiatives, there's the goal to kind of call out, some of these historical wrongs. But I think in many cases, a lot more context needs to be provided. One, is it even appropriate to have this in the comp plan? And I only say that because it is such a small segment of the city that we're talking about here, before the city was even incorporated. But also, usually what we see with this type of conversation is how certain segments of the population, lost the opportunity to build generational wealth because of this. They couldn't buy into the property and thus pass it down to their heirs or sell it off at an appreciated rate. But usually where we see these discussions are the fact that many of the neighborhoods that had these restricted covenants, to this day, even though the covenants that still technically exist on the deed, they haven't been legally enforceable since the 60s, as with the case, here in Mountlake Terrace. But the neighborhoods themselves have still held on to those demographics. We think of the nicer, tonier neighborhoods that had these codes with nicer housing, neighborhoods that even that most people can't even think about affording to live in anymore. Whereas in the case for Mountlake Terrace, this specific area that we're talking about, had those deeds and covenants, that sort of hidden restriction, even if it wasn't enforceable, really hasn't applied there. And historically, going back many decades now, has been considered kind of the lesser valued segment of the city. So, we haven't seen that, any kind of racial exclusion for generations there. And the neighborhood, it's the oldest housing stock, and it's kind of the least valued housing stock. So, again, I'm getting to the point where, context is kind of important here. Whereas when we think about this initial discussion, we think about expensive neighborhoods like Magnolia, Queen Anne, Mount Baker, those where they had those covenants. And to this day, those neighborhoods are harder to get into for, minority populations, primarily because the the cost of this housing is so high. Here it's not really that case. So again, partly devil's advocate, partly asking, hey, is this really appropriate for the planning, to be in the comp plan? I know the CPEG had, said, oh yeah, this sounds great. But I guess I'm coming at this from having actually studied this, and that's part of the problem too. I'm very aware of this because of, all the classes and reading and stuff that I've had to do over the years. The general, the average person, this might be new to them. They're like, oh, wow, but I just wonder, is it appropriate for the comp plan? Or if it is appropriate for the comp plan, do we need to provide a little bit more context with it?
I'll respond. I would say that it is appropriate. I think history tells us why we're where we are right now. If you look at, like you stated, the older housing stock, not really improved. I think that speaks to, the history speaks to why that is, I would say. There's a lot more there, I think, and I hear you. Yeah, do you want to?
Oh, sure. I think you actually got exactly to the point I was going to mention. It's also something that comes up in my work. I work within this community, and that discussion of past practices of redlining and restrictive covenants. I actually live in one of those houses that has the restrictive covenants, and it hasn't been enforceable in years. But at the same time, I think it feels culturally responsible for the town to acknowledge that that's something that did happen in the past. There's been, it's not mentioned in this, but one of the things that's come up in some of the other things that we've talked about, again, it's in my workplace, is that Snohomish County was not always as diverse as many of the other counties. It did have a reputation among particularly communities of color, and that's something that only changed, 20, 30 years ago, but that's not very long. So I think with all due respect, I absolutely understand it's not, there's an argument to be made of how this actually, should go within the plan, or how this should be placed within the plan. But I think it sort of speaking to the wrongs in history makes people a little bit more comfortable, and I think it makes those who would have been affected, who do live in the community now, feel that they're recognized. And that's just me. I can't speak, again, I can't speak to everyone, but I just think that might be the case.
Yeah.
I would like to add that we have a challenge that we haven't had before for racially disparate impacts that we have to include in our comp plan and in all elements, in all goals, and all policies. I understand it was struck down by the courts in '68. That's in my lifetime. So it's not that, even though it's maybe not when some people have been born, but I was born. I was a kid. So I don't think it was that long ago where people in this room's parents or grandparents or family members were excluded, I think, from areas where most people could have potentially afforded the property. So unlike Magnolia or some of the higher income areas, Mountlake Terrace was founded on affordable housing. And there was an opportunity here for all types of people, or more people, to be able to locate their families here, which they were unable to do. So I think it just speaks to, hey, acknowledging this is where we were, and that's okay, and this is where we're going. And, we're doing better, and we're going to be better, and if we're meeting our vision and our goals, we're making this community a place where all people can come and have a safe community and raise their families and live here and do all those things that we want to make this community. So I think in that context, it is important because it was, whether it was the banks, whether it was the developers, I'm sure at times it was both. It was one, it was the other. But the fact of the matter is that it was. It was. And, you know, and we weren't the only community that, where it was, but it did shape for the formation, at least initially, of the community and the people that came here. It did shape who was able to come and who wasn't. So that's my 2 cents.
And I do agree that it needs more context. So what's included in the attachment is very surface level. What will be included in the comprehensive plan introduction will be backed up by citations and research that we would do to prepare that information.
Yeah, and I do hear what you're saying, Chair Batista, about suburban safety. You know, that could be all different kinds of things, right? Regardless, I know that there's different things that are said, but, you know, just kind of getting away from the city. I mean, we still hear those things, and I don't know if they're necessarily race-based or whatever as much as they were previously, but, you know, that kind of context. So I can understand that maybe keying into a little bit more of what we know versus being a little bit more subjective. Maybe we need to be careful with that.
And again, part of the reason why I bring this up, one, devil's advocate, two, you're probably going to get other people asking the same question who might be a little bit more negative about the, you know, the inclusion of this at all. What I think is, you know, interesting to point, maybe not to point out, but it was interesting when you look at the map and you kind of understand the development history of the city itself. That initial development, yeah, they all had the restrictive deeds on it, but much more development occurred before that got struck down by the courts, and yet those developments don't have it. So it's just kind of interesting historical context. Well, you know, what, you know, they were all willing to put it in for that first development back when there was nothing up here, but as soon as, you know, you start to move into the other sectors of what I would consider, you know, the older part of the city, you don't see that there. So it's just kind of, it's like, well, why in this one case was it there, and where they legally could have easily applied it to probably a good third of the city as it exists today falls within that time period, maybe, you know, maybe even a little bit more. So it's just, you know, it's kind of food for thought. Sure. You know, I appreciate, you know, maybe, you know, putting a little bit more research in context into it. Because I do know some people's, you know, knee-jerk reactions to that aren't going to be very kind. And, you know, it's probably the same people that were Zoom bombing us at the meeting. But what I think is important to call that out, one, before we were even a city, and two, that historically this part of South County has usually had a higher population, minority population, than what we see in our neighboring cities. I think less than Linwood might be neck and neck, but definitely more than Briar, definitely more than Edmonds. I don't pay too much attention on south of the county line, but who knows where we are compared to, you know, Shoreline, definitely more, I can just say that, definitely more than Lake Forest Park. So it's just, you know, it's just, I think as part of the context, it's just like, you know, this is how it was, but this is how we've strived to be better since then. And, you know, that we're not defined by our past. It shaped part of the city for years, but, you know, I think it's safe to say, you know, especially as a city, as a government, we have moved beyond that, at least from a policy perspective. I can't get into the heads of individual people's thoughts, how wrong they may be sometimes, but yeah, just a little bit more context and history to that, because it's, it's just as it was, because I was, some of this was going through my head even when CPAC was talking about this. I'm just like, yeah, but, there's, a little bit more history, a little bit more, more context. I was saying that, as, somebody who grew up in this city, and experienced the city, long enough ago where we were closer to when those deeds were more prevalent and closer to when the courts shut that down versus where we are today. And even then, it, unfortunately, in this, depending on if you talk to real estate agents, those covenants today definitely did not make this city a more attractive place for people. I mean, there are real estate agents today who still steer their clients away from this, from our city, just because we're dealing with the reputation of the past of how the city was always kind of thought as lesser or not as nice, not as safe, not as, a lot more crime, even to this day, even with all the strides that we've made in the last few decades. So it just, just context, background,
Yeah.
devil's advocate.
Yeah, and as
Come at me.
Christy mentioned, with HB 1220, and we're legislatively required to sort of analyze a lot of our policies that may be unintentionally have racial disparate impacts. So how there are policies historically and currently sort of shape that.
And that's good to know that, that it's coming from the state level. So there's no ambiguity with that. It's like, no, you will do this. Because I know, APA has that in their goals and policies too, is to, recognize, these type of transgressions in the past, because that's how it shapes us in the future. Or shaped us in the past and the present and how we're moving forward. So it's just the fact that, no, this is law. We have to address this. That's, it's good to know.
All right. Then quickly, I'm going to go through the other two slides. Oh, sorry, Sierra.
Sorry, not to belabor the point too much, because I think that we've received a lot of feedback just on this point, and the sort of the community profile and setting the stage on where the sort of the city began, but just on that map that I think that we're focusing on like those handful of parcels that did have explicitly racial covenants in the deed themselves. I think to Christy's point earlier, that Mountlake Terrace was built as affordable housing, specifically for returning GIs, for who got home loans, not redlining, but home loans that were not available to people of color. And so just as in general, as a place, as a city that began from the get-go was explicitly not available to a large portion of the population. So I think that is some of the pieces that we can bring into this, just to build a little bit more context about, that was then. There are legacy implications from that can be addressed through new city policy, and that's not the reality today, but it's still something that shaped this community for a long time, and something that is part of the city vision to move beyond and to move past, as we're just looking at that vision statement. So that was my last sort of thought on this topic area. We will be coming back to you with more information about those racially disparate impacts analysis that is being required for the housing element. So stay tuned for more information about that. But I think that was all that I wanted to say on this matter.
All right. Going to go through the next couple slides pretty quickly, because we do have a lot to cover with the framework of growth alternatives. So the third section of the introduction will be purpose and scope of the comprehensive plan, sort of just summarizing what is the purpose of a comprehensive plan and why is it needed. Summarizing the state and regional implications, so state and regional planning requirements under the Growth Management Act,
Vision 2050, which is out of the Puget Sound Regional Council, and then Snohomish County countywide planning policies, describing the city growth targets allocation that were provided to us from Snohomish County and OFM, the Office of Financial Management, internal consistency, how planning across departments and amongst service providers in the city help us stay consistent and cohesive in planning for the future, how the plan is organized and where to find information that you might be looking for as you go through the comprehensive plan, and then how we would implement the plan. So each element will have implementation measures. The current comprehensive plan does have some implementation measures, but our goal is to prepare implementation measures that are actionable statements and really allow us to build policies that we can implement in full. Final section is planning process and public participation. So sort of summarizing what was the planning process for this comprehensive plan and the timeline for the update, and then summarizing public participation that was integral to the comprehensive plan update. So the work we did or we're doing with the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Group, engaging community-based organizations, presence at community events, online polling and engagement, and other engagement and outreach workshops, etc. So with that, any last questions on this section before I move it, pass it on to Sierra? Okay. All right, Sierra, do you want me to advance the slides?
Yes.
Okay.
That'd be great. So this section here, we just have a couple slides that are going over sort of our process for pulling together all of the element content that we'll be bringing to you, and just sort of give you a briefing on what kind of input that we will be looking for in the future. This presentation today is not about the different element goals and policies, but as we move through all those different modules that we've been talking about, there will be an opportunity to sort of review the introductory and narrative content to the element and give some feedback on what those key priorities should be. So as we think about housing and land use, the environment, economic vitality, capital facilities, sort of what are those key city priorities that should be integrated into the goals and policies. We'll also be presenting and giving you matrix content to review that goes over what those proposed goals and policies are, and we'll be looking for feedback on sort of the verbiage and a recommendation from this group to take to take in to account as we take the plan to City Council for adoption. As Jonathan was just saying, there will be implementation items integrated into each of the elements. And this is something that we'll be looking for feedback from the CPAG group. We'll be looking for input from this group. And we'll also be researching best practices and also looking at implementation through an equity lens as well, as this aligns with some of the just overarching key city priorities that we are aware of at this time. So again, nothing that we're looking for today from this group, but just to keep in mind as we move through this process, we will be going through these modules, looking for some feedback in sort of an orderly month-by-month fashion. Next slide. And then this is sort of a brief overview, just wanted to sort of prime the conversation. So as we review the existing policies in the comprehensive plan in each of the elements, whether they were written in 2015 with the last update, or more recently in 2017 or 2018 as the economic vitality element was updated, we will be reviewing each of those existing policies against some of these sort of best practices in planning policy, as well as integrating some new guidance that we've received from, best practice documents from our regional partners. So in line with some of the priorities that we've heard from the city in this group, as well as from the states we were just talking about, there's a lot of guidance and requirements that have come down out of the legislation last year on how to deal with some of these racially disparate impacts. So as we review policy, we will be looking at sort of verbiage and whether or not those policies may or may not have an unintended discriminatory effect. We also want to make sure that we're have clear, actionable policies that go with the implementation items. So we'll be reviewing some of those more vague policies and making some recommendations for how to make sure the intent is clear. And also ensuring that we're meeting state guidance and regional guidance, as well as sort of integrating what we have already heard from the CPAC group and from this group on policy direction in terms of new land use goals, new housing goals as we move forward. So I don't think that we were looking for any feedback from this group today. Again, this is just to sort of get the ideas flowing. We'll be coming back again. I think that our policy module will start in March, and we'll be going through each of the elements in more detail at that time. And I think the next slide is a schedule. So at our last module in December, we went over just sort of the overarching process and talked through the growth target allocations and introduced our SEPA process. Today, we're presenting on the introductory content that we just talked through, and we're going to be going into a conversation about the growth alternative framework that will be studied as part of the environmental impact statement. And our goal for our next meeting in February, which I know that this group has had some interest in, is really being able to have more of a workshop conversation about those sub areas, both Melody Hill and Cascade View, and sort of how they connect to the rest of the city. So that'll be the bulk of our next meeting, as well as giving an update on where we're at with the housing and land use discussions. And also revisiting some of that vision statement conversation that we had today. And as we head into March, April, May, this will be sort of our schedule to go sort of topic area by topic area through the comprehensive plan and get feedback on those policy language. And so with that, I think we can move on to our third agenda item tonight. So what we're here to present tonight is a framework of growth alternatives that are to be studied as part of the environmental impact statement. What we've heard from CPAC and what we've heard from this group is there is and also from City Council is that there is an appetite to really get into or be ambitious in evaluating what kind of growth the city is realistically going to see. There are some state requirements, such as HB 1110 and HB 1337, that are going to require amount of middle housing and ADUs to be allowed in the city. There's also, we have light rail in the town center. There's light rail access up by the Linwood border, access up there, and there is what we've heard from the community and from the bodies here in general is that there is an interest in seeing more housing production and affordable housing specifically, a diversity of housing, increased potential around some of those existing commercial nodes, expansion of housing types, and I'm also looking at some of the existing affordable housing and understanding how that could be preserved or protected through new policy updates. So as we go through this framework, this was something that was presented to CPAG earlier this month. And our feedback from that group was positive, and so we are now bringing this to Planning Commission to get your input and recommendations, so we can bring that to City Council, and at that point we will start the analysis process. So
Sierra,
next, Yeah.
Don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm wondering if you can define naturally occurring affordable apartments, just for the sake of the.
So I would not like to be quoted on this, but I will do my best to sort of explain. What we've found is that in general, when you have older apartment stock, that's generally going to be more naturally occurring affordable housing. It's not the new luxury apartment building. It's the 1970s, 1980s walk up apartment building and a garden apartment style with parking all around. And we do see a certain amount of that in the north area of the city in Cascade View. And we've also seen that some of those properties are ripe for redevelopment, for someone to come in and sort of redo everything, renovate, and increase rent. So as part of our work with our housing consultant, Leland, who presented last month, we've been working with city staff and also with CPAG and talking through sort of what are those affordable housing measures to either protect, preserve, or produce new affordable housing that can be integrated as part of this comprehensive plan process. And that is also, I think, an attachment that you'll see in your next packet as we move more towards the housing policy discussion in March. So we will have more, I guess, conversations about housing policy and what that means for affordable housing in the future.
Thank you.
I'm gonna interject real quick, just to ask a quick question, because I saw, in addition to the bullet item of the naturally occurring affordable apartments, mobile homes are also listed, and I know that in the past, a lot of people have said, oh, we need to, protect the mobile homes. Again, devil's advocate here. The age of the mobile homes in the city, they're getting up there, and they're going to be harder and harder to maintain. They aren't mobile. You're kind of stuck with it. And, for those who don't know, the occupants of the mobile home, may own the structure itself, but they don't actually own the land underneath. And while there are those who would say, protect the mobile homes because, right, they are, they kind of fall under the, affordable housing category. Others may say protect it as, to score political points. I do have concerns about, the future conditions of the structures themselves and maybe not having a backup plan. And I only say that because usually these mobile home locations are some of our larger lots in the city that, if redeveloped, would, as with other larger lots, would be able to provide potential to mandate, affordable housing as part of that development process. So rather than, outright just saying, oh, mobile home, untouchable, must preserve at all costs, regardless of the stock of the housing itself, would it be prudent or even on a theoretical basis that, have a backup plan or, scoping out, because part of the comp plan is, looking far off into the future. And, I don't want to say that every single mobile home is barely hanging on to the thread as it is, but, we're looking 20, 30 years out, and you add another 20, 30 years to these mobile homes, and just what condition are they going to be in and how livable are they going to be? Do we want to try and still continue to preserve that, or do we want to have a plan in place that provides for the replacement of that affordable housing mandated, but not necessarily preserving the mobile home itself? I know that's a lot there, and I'm sure
Yeah.
everybody has a variety of opinions on that, so.
Those are good points. That is some work that we're doing as part of the housing element analysis as far as what sort of, firstly, preservation, what sort of preservation policies and programs we could think about, or even support if there are regional programs that we would like to emphasize as part of this comp plan update. And then looking into the manufactured home parks as far as preservation, but also sort of what you alluded to as far as, well, what if we mandate something, those sites as affordable housing? So I don't have an answer today, but that's the work that we're doing as part of this process with Leland Consulting specifically.
And one of the reasons I bring that up is I'm not 100% positive, but I'm pretty sure that the mobile home parks that are in the city are not owned by corporate entities. So they're still, I think they're, privately held by individuals or families or, whatever kind of operational structure they have. So there is the potential, though, that when they sell, if there are no other buyers who are looking to, redevelop more holistically, their only option would be to sell to mobile home corporations who generally don't have, maybe the current occupant's best interest at heart and have any desire to keep it, affordable.
Yeah. So, and what I would say to that is we do have a mobile home zoning designation. So if a developer was to purchase that property, they would have to do a zoning change in order to allow for something other than mobile home park. So right now, those are specifically zoned and cited as mobile home parks. So it'd be difficult to go through a process where that would change. Yeah. Anything to add to that?
No, I think, like Jonathan said, we've been talking a lot about this because it is affordable housing. The age is a consideration of what kind of standards do you have in place to allow the replacement of these mobile homes? Because they do have a shelf life. And so do you have standards in place that you can replace a mobile home with a newer or different manufactured housing? And what does that look like in terms of zoning setbacks and those type of things, where you keep things safe, but realizing when these parks were created, they were created with, what was a lot of times like a single wide mobile home in mind, or with a tip out, it's not a tip out, an expando, the nomenclature. But now they look very different. Manufactured housing looks very different. And so what does that look like if you were to keep the zoning in place as either affordable housing or manufactured housing? What does that look like? So, yeah, I think we need to address that.
I would say as part of that, usually the big issue that comes up with, any kind of, especially change of land use designation is, displacement. But if the existing mobile home is no longer viable as a dwelling and has to be replaced, you're already going to be having displacement there to begin with. Unfortunately, the odds are the person in that mobile home isn't going to probably be able to afford to have a whole new, manufactured home put in its place. The manufactured homes are, larger now than what the original footprint of the mobile home is. So is there, as the lots are configured right now, would there even be space to put one manufactured home on one lot? Or are you reconfiguring it? It's like, oh, manufactured home, now it's going to take up two lots, so that's displacing two mobile homes. So you kind of see where I'm going here. Yet you're going to have displacement anyway at some point. Is it better to, I hate to say it this way, but rip off the Band-Aid now and plan, and have a good plan in place in the future, and especially where some of the, these mobile homes are located? I'm thinking, like what we're talking about with what we're hoping to envision for, our northeast sector, that mobile home, I mean, that development completely walls itself off from any street use activity at all. Would it be better to see whatever happens come in there, be more engaging, to help develop sort of an expanding commercial core in that area as well? Most likely, I'm thinking, you're probably going to see some sort of mixed use there. 44th is a busy street. You're going to probably have some sort of, more commercial type of retail. But I just think about it, and it's like, I don't want to set us up for failure. At the same time, I recognize how, in some cases, it's almost like a political third rail when we talk about these type of structures. But, the reality is that they're not long for this world, and the replacements may not be able to be instituted like for like. So recognizing that, why don't we, maybe consider planning to take that consideration in mind, so that any type of loss of, low-income housing is replaced, but understanding that the type of housing is going to be different than what we see. Because at the end of the day, yeah, they own the mobile home, but they don't own the land underneath. So it's not like somebody who actually owns a regular house, where they own the land and they have the control of that land. At the end of the day, they're always at the whim, because they're paying rent. And so, again, part of it's devil's advocate, part of it, living in this city as long as I have, and knowing that and just seeing decade after decade how this stock is deteriorating and not having a plan or a vision in place. And, the comp plan's all about planning and visioning. So I don't want to say we've kicked the can down the road every time that, we've re-upped the comp plan when it comes to this matter. But, I think it might bear some serious thought about, how we're envisioning, these spaces moving forward.
Just to expanding on the chair's point, and this is something I've always kind of wondered, and I don't know if there might be an answer. Does the city have any sort of, are there any sort of legal mechanisms to address displacement in the event of, say, so for example, I think some other communities in the area and around the country have had this issue of where you've had to get rid of low-income housing, and then you can build more, but in the interim time between when that older housing was removed, those people who were community members, maybe sometimes for years, for decades, they have to go somewhere else because there's just not a lot of other places where they can afford or they get on the list to come back, if they are able to come back. Are there any sort of legal mechanisms to address that sort of displacement, or is it even something that gets considered in sort of the decision-making for planning?
I know Seattle does.
There are means some communities do use for displacement, but that currently the city does not have anything for that. I think that's going to be one of our challenges, is what does that look like, and the cost associated with that. And also one of our requirements is looking at displacement in this comp plan based on the new legislation. So it's before maybe where we didn't have to address displacement and those type of things. In this round of comp planning, we do. So
There are some tools such as relocation, renters relocation assistance. So if someone's getting, for example, evicted from their property, in some jurisdictions, the city is required to provide relocation assistance. So that's not something we currently have, and I don't think it's mandated at a statewide level yet. I believe it's been brought up in legislation, but I'm not at this moment.
Thank you.
I have a question. This document is called the growth, today we're reviewing the Growth Alternative Framework.
Yes, those are coming up.
Okay, I see a lot of discussion about housing. Is the purpose of this limited to housing, or are we talking about, I know there's an economic vitality element and other parts of the comp plan. Is this separate from that, or is this also informing that as well?
So as far as the growth alternatives framework, this is looking at sort of land use implications and housing implications to understand where we should be, how we should be growing in terms of what the growth allocations are for housing, and then also population. So where are we to build new housing? Where are we to preserve existing housing? So a lot of this is informed by the land use and housing elements. There are some, I would say there's, of course, some implications in terms of economic development that are addressed here as well. And Sarah, not sure if you can expand on that.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, why don't we start going through some of these
Yeah.
slides, because we do have a couple of slides that go over like what is the growth alternative, which might help sort of prime the conversation that we're having today. And just to speak on the difference on sort of what we're evaluating here in terms of housing and in terms of economic development, part of the sort of the the crux of why we're here is that as part of the comp planning process, the state and the county has sort of handed down a number of jobs and a number of housing units that they expect that Mountlake Terrace would have the capacity to incorporate over the next 20 years. And I think that we've presented some of those numbers in the past. And so this growth alternative framework sort of outlines the different methods or the different alternatives that the city can take in order to accommodate those growth targets. And we have sort of a no action and a sort of a minimum and a longer range option that I'll get into more detail on. But really the purpose here is to have 3 distinct sort of growth scenarios that can be studied as part of the EIS process. And we want to make sure that those 3 alternatives that we look at align with the input that we received from the CPAG and from the Planning Commission, as well as from City Council. And so we've heard that there's a lot of interest in looking at the different impacts of HB 1110, sort of what happens if we require duplexes, what happens if we allow fourplexes. There's a lot of different things that we can evaluate here. But the sort of like 3 scenario structure that we're going to present today provides us with a range of scenarios to study what different types of growth would do to the city in the future. And so this will provide us with the basis to study transportation needs, utility needs, public service needs, park needs, sort of what are all the implications of growth in these 3 different scenarios on the needs for Mountlake Terrace, the city, and the residents in the future. So really focusing on, where the jobs going to be, how many jobs are there going to be, where's the housing units going to be, and how many housing units will there be, and sort of what is the impact of those jobs, those housing units in different configurations on the city in the future. So I think this is sort of our overview slide in trying to give a wide variety. We've chosen a sort of a no action scenario, which is something that is good to study because it gives us a sort of a baseline of understanding. But because we know that the city will need to do some zoning changes in order to accommodate new state law, we've called this the status quo alternative. So this will allow us to look at, the next 20 years, what would the impacts be if all the city did was comply with state law. All that happened is, yes, we will allow duplexes, and yes, we will allow ADUs on every lot. So it's kind of like our no action, our bare minimum, just to see what that scenario looks like. Our second alternative would be to look at sort of at a minimum, because we know that status quo alternative of just allowing duplexes isn't really going to get us to that growth target in a meaningful way. Our alternative two is giving us the opportunity to sort of target some minor changes to zoning that are going to get us to that housing and job allocation. So this is going to be some more minor tweaks, looking at maybe just expanding the transition zone, maybe just looking at some of those existing commercial areas. But really, what is the sort of like a minimum standard to get us to that growth target capacity? And then in that alternative three, this is our let's do everything. Let's look at, expanding the transition zone more than just around town center. Let's look at creating nodes at Cedar Terrace. Let's look at creating nodes up by the Safeway on the Linwood border on 212. What happens around Melody Hill? Sort of looking more holistically about, we know that there's going to be a lot of change coming to the city, and sort of how do we get ahead of it? How do we plan proactively for the future to accommodate what could happen 20, 40 years down the line? This is sort of like our outline, our three distinct scenarios in order to sort of get the full sweep of change that could happen at Mountlake Terrace over the next 20 years. Now, I do have quite a few slides here that kind of get into the details on what exactly each of the House bills that are currently enacted do. We've had some conversations here with this body about HB 1110 and specifically what those different tiers mean. As it currently stands, Mountlake Terrace is a Tier 3 city, which means that at this point, the city needs to comply with sort of the lowest bar of the House bill, with the understanding that, at 5 years down the line, when the city has to do its new implementation report, it might be at that Tier 2 status. But again, for our status quo alternative, what we're looking at is sort of what would happen only if we do just kind of that just comply mentality. So next slide, Jonathan. So again, what I was saying is that currently we're a Tier 3 city. In the future could be a Tier 2, but really want to focus on what's required at sort of that baseline for a Tier 3 city. So next slide. Again, this would change all existing single-family areas. All parcels would, at minimum, be allowed to build a duplex on every lot with no parking minimums within that half mile of the light rail station, maximum of one off-street parking spot, and some changes to those height, setback, and lot coverage requirements. And really that difference between Tier 2 and Tier 3 is that in this bottom tier, we aren't requiring or allowing that fourplex within the half mile or quarter mile of transit. But again, as part of our status quo alternative, it's really informative to explore what happens at that baseline. Next slide, please. And then again, the city is required to explore and allow 4 of sort of the 9 types of middle housing that the state included in the House bill. So looking at duplexes, how to integrate duplexes, townhomes, stack flats, and cottage housing into the code. And so the city does already acknowledge townhomes and cottage housing. We'll be looking at stack flats and what that kind of plays into some of the building code implications, as well as duplexes, which will be allowed on all residential lots. Next
Just
slide.
for context, duplexes are currently allowed in the RS 8400 zoning district. So with this new legislation, we'll be mandated to allow for that on every single residential zone lot.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jonathan. And then just to, as I was saying, for the Tier 2 cities, which Valley Terrace is not currently, but could be in the future. That's when we get into the, a blanket allowance of 2 units citywide, but allowance of 4 units when you're near those major transit corridors, transit stations, or if you're going to allow at least 1 affordable unit. And there's some more context about what affordable means when we're talking about these requirements in the state guidance. But I don't have that information off the top of my head right now. There's also, same parking requirements as we saw with Tier 3, as well as updated setback and lot coverage requirements, and that there is the requirement to allow more middle housing types off that list we just looked at least 6 out of those 9 middle housing types. Next slide. And then that other House bill that we've been talking about, that 1337, this is the bill that does require the city to loosen up its ADU regulations. This would allow 2 ADUs per lot, and either an accessory attached dwelling unit or a detached dwelling unit. It also gets rid of the owner occupancy requirement. It'll allow separate sale of the ADU, so increasing ownership opportunity. Make sure that parking requirements are consistent with that state law, and also set the requirement that the maximum size limit of an ADU cannot be less than 1,000 square feet. So you can't mandate that an ADU be 800 square feet or 750. It has to at least be 1,000 square feet. And this would also limit the amount of design regulations that the city could place on ADU development, as well as any extraneous permitting processes outside of sort of what would be required for a single family home. Next slide. And so this is we're going to get into some maps here. And like I said, when I sort of started talking through these alternatives, it's our understanding based on state guidance is that just saying that duplexes are allowed citywide, that means we have, 1,000 lots. That means we have 2,000 housing units. Hurrah, we've made our growth targets. That's really not the way that it's going to work in this scenario. So we have done some initial feasibility analysis looking at lot to improvement, cost ratios, as well as, it's some other methodology that I'll get into about where could the city expect to see duplex and ADU development, as well as sort of how many the city might expect to see over the next 20 years. So we're acknowledging that 1337 and HB 1110 would need to be applied to all of sort of the yellow that you're seeing on this map. And this is all of the single family or predominantly residential lots in the city. And this will need to go into effect at minimum 6 months after the comp plan update, and then 12 months, a year after the next implementation report. So that'll be 5 years after the 2024 deadline, so 2029, if it becomes necessary to comply with Tier 2. And so next slide, please. So like I was saying, we've run a couple numbers just to anticipate what is a reasonable assumption of ADU development to expect over the next 20 years, looking at all single-family parcels in the city, those that have a significant amount of undeveloped space, that don't have critical areas, having a 50% reduction to make sure that we're being conservative with these estimates, because you want to have a realistic idea of what the future will hold, and assuming that a certain amount of people are going to build 1 ADU and a certain percentage are going to build 2. And so we get a number of approximately 93 potential ADUs being built through 2044, which is about 4 to 5 ADUs per year. So again, this is a pretty conservative estimate, but we're really trying to get a looking at regional trends, sort of what is a good estimate on what the impact of these bills are going to be on the neighborhoods in Mountlake Terrace. Additionally, we've done a similar analysis for duplexes. Next slide.
Before we
I
move
think-
on, I have some questions about this. So this number is based on our past performance of ADUs, is that correct?
This number is not entirely based on past performance of ADUs. It's ADUs in Mountlake Terrace have been a pretty slow development pattern. I think, Jonathan, it's like maybe a handful that have been permitted over the last couple of years. And
So, yeah.
The analysis here is assuming about 5% growth. 5% of the city would build an ADU, which is a pretty conservative estimate in line with what Linwood is assuming, what we know that Boswell's assuming. Seattle has actually a much lower percentage of ADU development if you're looking at single-family parcels citywide. So, again, not looking at past trends, but looking at sort of what as a region is being anticipated for the future.
Okay, I know, like seeing, half of an ADU to 4.6 ADUs built per year. I don't know where their assumptions are coming from, but I've seen a lot of increase in ADU production once ADU reform has come around. Like it just kind of, takes off like a rocket, right? So I'd like to know a little bit more about where your assumptions come from, because I think, if some of this is based on pre-ADU reform, where you have all these restrictions on ADU, the size limitation, the owner occupancy, the lack of ability to sell them out, I think I'd like to see something a bit more robust than that. I'm not sure if you have like a report or something that kind of goes into those numbers a bit more, but I think a range could be helpful, because, when I look at the, I get email spam because I signed up for a open house once, and now Redfin sends me a bunch of things, and every day it's just deluge of these 1,000 square foot ADUs and DADUs that have built in Seattle that are selling for about $500,000, and I would expect them to be cheaper in Mountlake Terrace. So this is potentially an affordable solution I think I could see for us. The other thing I would be interested to see is you're using our current lot coverage ratios of 40% to calculate the 1,000 square feet.
So I will say that these are slides that were put together by our housing expert, Leland, who is not here tonight presenting these. So I can go back to them with some of these questions that you have. But I will say that for this sort of status quo assumption, we want to have a conservative estimate on the number of ADUs that would be built, and that we can look at in the other alternatives some more robust development of ADUs in those scenarios. This is a very high level sort of preliminary study, and so I do agree that there could be more robust analysis that goes into this. And it's something that as we work with the city and sort of discuss more about how these bills are integrated into the zoning code, that the city is doing separately from this comp plan update. There is the opportunity to do more of a fine-grained analysis as a potential. But for the purposes of our work here, really just, it is painting with a really wide brush, and I get that. It's you want to know the numbers and everything that's going into this, but we're really just trying to get a high level estimate. And that 5% that I'm talking about, that is looking towards the future, and that is looking not at other production with all the sort of extraneous requirements. It's looking at the future, what we're going to see once we take all of those out. And I've been there. I walked around Seattle. I see all those ADUs going up, and even when you look at the production trends, it's still I think less than 0.1% of single-family lots in the city. So that 5% is actually, I think that's more than you think, as we're looking at the city overall.
Okay. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about sort of the analysis and when they're getting their numbers. Because when we start digging into the numbers, it's, I think, helpful to know. And then the other thing I kind of wanted to see is if, these are like the variables we can look at. And so if, we did like, say, increase our lot coverage amount, like how many more could we get, right? Like, as we're making the decision of what these numbers should be. And so, I would like to hear a bit more about that in the future, if that's possible.
Okay. Sounds good. And then there is a 50% reduction on the amount of lots that were assumed for ADUs, because the other 50% of lots were part of our duplex sort of feasibility analysis. So I think, Jonathan, if you go to the next slide here.
Yeah, that's a good segue.
So we also did a similar sort of broad brush high feasibility analysis for the number of duplexes that could be expected with these new requirements. And there's not a lot of past trends to base this on, because there really hasn't been any duplex development in the city or in close by since 2001. And so this is really assuming just broad brush about a 10% of lots would build a duplex. And so this is also, assuming improvement to land, a value ratio is less than 1, that, your land ratio is much, much higher than your house ratio. So that makes it easier to pencil out sort of the putting more improvement on the land. It's also assuming parcels that have a much higher amount of development space. So it's 2,000 square feet of developable space within the lot coverage ratio. And so with this analysis, we're assuming, about 260 ADUs built, 260 duplexes built over the next 20 years, with about 13 of these built per year. So again, same, we're just high level assumptions here at a conservative estimate, just to give us an idea of where we're starting, and we can fine tune it from there. But this is where we at least started to get an idea of how those two house builds are gonna impact the city.
Sorry, I'm asking another question. What's the difference between an ADU and a duplex?
So a duplex, this is a great question, because you're getting into the nuances of how things are, how housing types are sort of categorized. But a duplex, you'd be assuming two equal sort of, I have my half, you have your half, sort of, rental or ownership sort of on one piece of property. And with a single family home with an ADU, it's more of an accessory structure. So it's going to be like a smaller, more cottage home or carriage, above a garage sort of structure, with the assumption that it's going to be an accessory structure to the main house in some way. And while there is the opportunity to sell off those the ADU structures in some sort of condo agreement, it's still going to be it's just a different way to split up and permit the configuration of housing units on a lot.
I have a quick question for you, Sierra. So between these two maps, I'm seeing a lot of similar areas that you showed us, so for duplexes and for the ADUs. And so is that showing us that it's either one or the other, or it can be both?
So it's really, the map is just showing sort of any lot that as we went through this high level analysis, that kind of met the criteria, that's kind of shown here on the map. So for duplexes, the orange parcels you're seeing pop up are all single family lots in the city that have a developable area of more than 2,000 square feet, that aren't in a critical area, and have an improvement to land value ratio of less than 1. And then the assumption is about 10% of those lots that you're seeing would be redeveloped into a duplex over the next 20 years. So it's not everything that you're seeing in orange. It's about 10% of those.
Oh.
And then the criteria is a little bit different on the ADU lot. It's not as much taking into account the land to improvement ratio, because you're not expecting someone, you're expecting perhaps the existing homeowner to come in and build the ADU on the back of their parcel. So it's not so much thinking about the land to improvement ratio, because it's not so much a development package that someone's going to just come in and build without already living there. But we're looking at, so we have slightly less lots here because we're also looking at a smaller amount of usable space on the lot. And we're also, we did a 50% reduction on the ADUs. So about 50% of these lots, and then about to accommodate for ones that could be duplexes, and then about 5% of those 50% are assumed to build an ADU or 2 ADUs.
Awesome. So just to repeat back, I think it's like of the potential ADUs, 5% of those are possible. Of the potential duplexes, 10% of those are possible. But some of them could be possible for both just based on the qualifications.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course. And so again, to reiterate, this is our broad brush, high feasibility analysis. It's really getting the crux of sort of if the city just did everything they needed to meet the letter of the law, what would happen and what would the impacts be? So that's sort of why we did that high level analysis. And with the understanding that just meeting the letter of the law really isn't going to get to the city into compliance with meeting the growth target requirements. So that's how we come to alternative 2, is meeting the growth target. And so this will be looking at, as part of this, this sort of alternative is looking at and targeting some key zoning changes at a high opportunity location that we've heard from CPAC and from this group to sort of increase the amount of housing capacity expected there and job capacity, increasing variety of housing built across the city. What does it look like to expand the existing transition zone? And then removing low barrier opportunities or more lower barrier opportunities for first-time homeowners. If we're going to build more smaller units, that does open up the opportunity for additional ownership opportunities. If the market deems that a good opportunity. But we do need to put some further study into this alternative to look at sort of, again, what is that sort of tweaking that we do to just meet the growth target. And with this alternative, it gives us the opportunity to sort of provide the analysis on an alternative, on what needs to happen to get the city into sort of compliance with not just state law, but with the growth targets that the city needs to meet as part of the comp plan update. Jonathan, can you go to the next slide here? And so as part of this analysis, again, we'll be targeting sort of some key zoning change recommendations, perhaps around the existing Cedar Terrace development up on 212th, where we have existing multifamily and commercial properties, and then expanding the transition zone around the light rail station to see what happens to get us to that growth target alternative. Because as we discussed last month, there is a bit of a deficit to get us to that growth target requirement. We'd also be looking at sort of what are the development standard changes that need to happen to incentivize development. As we were talking about, maybe that 40% lot coverage requirement isn't going to really incentivize a lot of ADU development, but if there are other recommendations for, development standards that might get more property owners interested in taking advantage of some of the state laws, that's something that we can explore as part of this alternative. because there is that 5% is a pretty conservative number, and it could change as we get into some of these other alternatives. And then our growth alternative 3 is really that longer range alternative. And I will be done talking here soon, and we do have a couple key questions again for the commission. But I just want to go over this last sort of alternative that we want to talk through today. And so this is alternative 3, our long range alternative, trying to respond to some of the direction that we've heard from the different from CPAC, from the Group Planning Commission, and from City Council on having the appetite to explore more growth maybe than what is currently expected in the city. There is an acknowledgement that housing affordability is an issue. There is a need and a desire from the community to have a variety of housing, to have sort of, those connected communities, to have those neighborhoods, to have vibrant places. And part of the way that we get that you can get there is by increasing the amount of housing that's allowed in the city. So this is also looking at sort of that longer, beyond the 20-year planning horizon, is that maybe not all the growth is going to happen between now and 2044, but it's setting up the city proactively to sort of look at that longer range horizon. And we also want to make sure that we're capitalizing on the existing transit corridors we have, taking full advantage of the light rail station, taking full advantage of any, future high capacity transit that the city might see. And with the understanding that it's a very land constrained city. It's only 4 square miles, and it could be a desirable place to live, and we want to make sure that we are filling the needs of the community as part of this process. So as part of this process as well, we'll be looking more at sort of what is the optimal sort of level of development for middle housing. Right now the city is required to do duplexes. It could be required to do fourplexes in the future, but are we going to see projects with like 8 to 12 units? Sort of where does that fit into the overall sort of city structure? What kind of development and financial feasibility measures can we put into place to make sure that we actually are getting the middle housing development that we want to see in the city? And again, looking at forward thinking in terms of development regulations and law dimension standards to support and to make sure that development is feasible in the future. So this is my last slide here. And this is, again, another map that's really, we're popping up all over the place. So as part of this scenario, we'd be looking at increasing the amount of commercial mixed-use development allowed at several nodes in the city, around Cedar Terrace, around, again, the Safeway on 212th, around some of those commercial nodes on 212th, as well as, the east side of the freeway, by that on near Melody Hill, with the understanding that there is some future development and or transit opportunities sort of at that intersection. This alternative also gives us the opportunity to look at what happens if we upzone around existing commercial corridors. If we go farther, if we take the full advantage of 44th, taking full advantage of 56th, sort of what happens in those scenarios, and how do we incentivize, or what happens if you incentivize more middle housing development in the existing residential neighborhoods. So again, sort of like our far-reaching alternative. So I think our last slide here to really tee off the last discussion that we want to have here tonight is, as we look at these 3 alternatives that will be studied as part of this plan, we want to get some feedback here from this group on understanding if these alternatives are aligning with their conversations as we've previously had, if there's any suggested changes this body has to bring these alternatives more in alignment with any feedback that we may have missed, and just making sure that the difference between these alternatives makes sense and the nuances make sense to this body as we take this to City Council and study this as part of the EIS. So with that, I will stop talking. And Jonathan, I would appreciate if you'd help me facilitate any questions or conversations.
Sure. Chair Batista?
Yeah, so I have a couple questions, but I'll kind of start off with a comment first. Not so much anything that, the city or its consultants are done, but it's been extremely frustrating to have some of these changes forced upon us at the state level, kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Especially like with ADU stuff, we spent a considerable amount of time over a considerable amount of years crafting our ADU policy, going through the extra effort on allowing it, and it being context sensitive still to the city when some of our neighboring jurisdictions chose to ignore it. And I feel in a way we're being punished for their inaction. So I'm a little frustrated that, we see some of these new standards that the state is forcing upon us, regardless across the board, statewide. I think planning really happens at more of a local level, not at a state level. So that's my little soapbox statement for that. I know we're kind of powerless to that decision, and we got to live with it, but it's still extremely frustrating. The big question I have, and I may have some others after I hear what other people talk about, is going between sort of that alternative 2 and alternative 3 map. And I know that, the maps, they're just kind of as the crow flies, half mile, quarter mile distances. But in some cases, we are just barely missing out on some key areas that I still feel that would be ripe to be included. For example, on the alternative 2 map, we've got that half mile radius kind of starting, I'm assuming that's the center point is the light rail station. But it barely makes, it just stops short of the city limits. And I've always felt, and I hope we get to it when we talk about the, sort of the gateway sub-area plan, that it's a missed opportunity to leave out 244th, especially with what Shoreline's doing just across the street. And we always forget, a lot of times planning, you forget about what's your neighbor doing right across the street. Well, Shoreline right across the street has not only permitted, but built mixed-use, multi-story housing there. And, on our side of the street, we have what used to be housing stock is now converted to commercial businesses, but they're still using the original housing stock. They just converted the use. I think it's a shame to sort of miss out. So I know that these are just probably more for visualization purposes, but like if it could be like a half mile radius plus another block or 2 blocks, just to, because we're just, just to squeak those few that extra block in, I think we'd be missing out if we left that off. Same thing that goes with the quarter mile radius around Cedar Plaza. Just above that is a small commercial node that's been there since the 60s. Honestly, I can give you the laundry list of the different businesses that have been there, but it's just outside of that radius, and I think that lot eventually, would be ripe for redevelopment. Partly one, because it's already commercial there, the big lot, but also across the street are some of the deepest single-family residential lots in the city still, because some of the housing stock that was built there predates the city by decades. So they're kind of an outlier in terms of their lot size. There's been a little bit of infill development there, but I think just using that quarter mile radius, we might be missing out on some really good opportunities. Now, obviously in the third alternative, kind of everything's covered. So it's, those aren't being messed out. But, if you're looking for like a happy medium between 2 and 3, that'd be some considerations. And then I know, and it's reflected on the alternative 3, but it'd be nice to see if it was on the alternative 2 as well. Cause I remember there was discussion at the CPAG meeting about that, but having more intense development on 220th and the freeway, partly in recognition because eventually there may be another light rail station coming in there. I'm not going to hold my breath. We can all wish, dream, and hope for it. But just the mere fact that we do have the freeway interchange right there. And it'd be kind of nice to maybe see that note included on the alternative 2. I mean, it is on the alternative 3, but I think it would be, acceptable to be included on the alternative 2. Don't know how other people feel about these comments, or maybe they got their own comments, but, I'll kind of stop there and let some other people talk.
I would actually like to move back to because I don't think there was a map for alternative 2, right? Like that's like kind of the intermediate study, but then, okay, yeah, so we've got the circles, and then alternative 3 is like
Circles everywhere.
but circles everywhere. They took the alternative 2 circles and made more circles around the circles, and then added some yellow circles. Yes, okay, thanks. If we could stay on that screen, I feel like that might help have context. Is everyone okay with that, or? Because when you're talking about these things, I'm like, oh, I'm trying to remember what these things were.
Sorry, I'm looking at a printed version, so I have my
Yeah.
reference. I realize, sorry, everybody else
I did not come
relied on the screen, so.
I did not come prepared, so that was my fault. So, sorry, since I just started talking, I guess I'll say, so it makes sense. The approach kind of makes sense to me. Alternative 3 is we're like densifying everything, and I don't know if that is, if the yellow should actually be over the entire city or if it's just in individual parts. It's obviously like a beginning graphic representation, and I think that's it. And I think your comment on the 220th node is actually reflected in that circle there. That's where 220th looks like it comes across I-5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On this map.
Yeah. So alternative 3 does address it. Alternative 2 does not. One thing I feel like is missing from this is houses for businesses and houses for services, because we're sort of looking at this from a housing lens, but I think if we look at that in isolation, and there's obviously like a lot of robust analysis that goes into the housing, but if we don't have a similarly robust program analysis to look at neighborhood services and business space, like how many square feet of commercial like space do we need? How many people are we projected to need for school? Things like that. Like, I think it starts to create a situation where we've made these like, big circular warehouses for people, and then they all drive their car to the Winco. And if we do that, I think it failed. So I'd like to see that, and I'd also like to see this broken down by neighborhood a little bit more. Like, it would be good if we had a report on the neighborhood. And one of the reasons why I asked the questions at the beginning, like, what is the ADU, what is the duplex, like, where are these numbers coming from, is one thing I do want to see is, back, I think in the December presentation, they gave the PowerPoint on like, what the affordability assumptions they have for each of these kind of units is. And I would like to see, kind of a projection of how many units of housing of each type for each affordability are for each sub area. And, we can talk, not to go in too much of a tangent, but I think the sub areas should actually be more like a walking radius sized kind of area, but we're working with what we have. Because I think I want to see the impact on each neighborhood from the proposed changes that we're making. And that starts to define the vision for what we're making for each of these neighborhoods. And I think those two things are the things that are missing from this a little bit, or maybe still need to be developed. But, if we do find that one of our sub areas has like a whole bunch of housing and like nothing else, like that starts to show a problem that we need to address with some kind of other intervention.
Anyone else? Comments, questions, observations?
I also have a little bit of a concern, back to the map, sorry. We have, we sort of like to put our transitional zones on our, it's like the most people in the most affordable housing on the noisiest arterials. And, maybe this is a comment beyond that statement, but I see like that connection on 44th there. I just can't imagine putting like a bunch of town center style townhouses facing like this 4-lane road where everyone's going 45. Like that is something that, you know, needs a bit of visioning there when we start to look at that, when we get to that point.
I would agree. It'd be nice to see, you know, maybe some commercial numbers with this as well. One of the other questions that I have because we aren't doing all the sub-area plans all at once. It would be nice to see those breakout of the sub-area plans. Is that something that we would just have to wait for when we work on those individual sub-areas? And since we are actually at least tackling 2 of those, will we see more detailed info for the 2 sub-areas that we're tackling as part of this process?
I think the housing assumptions would cover all sub-areas, as far as I'm concerned. Sierra, is that true for Leland's Consulting?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of the housing and jobs numbers are being calculated citywide, and they are being calculated at I think a parcel level and a block level and a TAZ levels. We can see it sort of geographically displayed citywide what it will look like, and just to speak to just a little bit of our process here. The framework that we're presenting, getting feedback on tonight, that we will refine and bring some of those comments as well to City Council. This is our starting point for evaluating those impacts that I think that some of you were speaking to tonight. Is that what happens, you know, we're putting all this housing here, what are the public services that are needed, what is the public space that's needed, what is the transportation improvements that are needed in order to make sure that we are providing amenities to the people that will be living in the city. So, and more of the number focus, like how much housing we're going to see in these places, that again is going to come as part of the analysis, which we will begin after we sort of vet this framework through the different decisional bodies here. So I think that some of the nitty-gritty data that you're looking for, you'll see at a future presentation. But our purpose here tonight is to sort of, does this sort of fit the I guess as we outline this framework, is there anything that, you know, we're missing, or just is there just like a gut check of, yeah, this is you know, alternatives that we definitely want to see evaluated as part of the EIS. And also, as we go through some of the sub area workshop work with this group, where we can also place some of these sort of longer range nodes on those maps with the sub-area boundaries, and that might also help the conversation about, you know, as we look at some of the nodes that the city wants to invest in the future, how do we create more connected neighborhoods out of those on our existing sort of sub-area boundaries?
I think one of the things that is, you know, important to consider, and I'm sure you guys, you know, have thought about this, is that, you know, there's smart growth and then there's growth for just growth's sake. And part of what we want to see with this smart growth is, you know, commute trip reduction and reducing vehicle miles traveled. That really will only occur if the new growth is kind of within a walking distance of, you know, kind of these commercial nodes or activities. You know, if we're planning for all this hyper growth in areas where you're still going to be reliant on driving everywhere, that isn't necessarily the best growth, because then you're kind of you're losing sight of the goal of maybe we can have growth where people don't need their cars. Wouldn't that be nice? Or, you know, that it's convenient to walk, or they're able to walk. I mean, yes, we do have transit, but, you know, that's leaving us at the whims of community transit current budget cycle and how many, you know, what the frequency they want to provide us is. You know, just because we have, you know, maybe a year or two with robust transit, 5 years from now, that might get cut. So, you know, you can't always rely on that. And I think those are important considerations. And, obviously with the alternative 2 map, those nodes are definitely near commercial centers, except for kind of the omission of, kind of 220th and the I-5 area. The other kind of more of a question I had is that we've had discussions in the past about reducing the size of these sub-areas and splitting some of them up. Are we going to be able to address that as part of this comp plan cycle? Especially since at least one of those sub-areas would be a sub-area that we're working on, in this cycle?
I don't think that's something we discuss, but maybe something that we can consider if it's determined that that makes the most sense.
Because I know, if, when you're treating we're looking at least the 2 sub-areas that we're looking at, we're already going through all the numbers.
Sure.
So whether it's just a split right down half the middle, or there's more of a logical sense, okay, if you're east of this street or west of this street, this is a natural demarcation, and so now we're going to, everything on the east, that's one focus, everything on the, you can kind of do that in tandem with the 2 sub-areas that we're talking about right now. But I know a lot of the conversation in the past is, especially with Gateway is so different on the far eastern side versus the far western side, and there's no real relation between, those 2 areas other than the fact that they share the southern border of the city. But we're not talking about Gateway as part of this cycle. It would be nice when we get to the Gateway cycle that that's already been made, so we're not spending, because even when we were having these discussions several years ago about Gateway, we knew, hey, we're going to end up spending a lot of time on the western part of this sub-area. But the eastern part, it's kind of out there. It's its own little island. It's not really close to anything. It's all residential. There's no commercial. Not as much time needs to be spent on that necessarily as the western side. If we have that split now, then when it does come time to focus on that, we can really focus on the areas that need to be focused. Some areas, everything should get our attention, but we don't have to budget as much time to that area. So, and which means we could also maybe split up when we address that area. It could be maybe instead of the 2 areas being, this is more of a logistics thing, instead of, we'll just call it for now, East Gateway and West Gateway. Instead of having to deal with those 2 things at the same time, we could deal with, maybe throw East Gateway with another area that we've split off that is of similar composition, no commercial nodes, primarily single-family housing, no multi-family housing, similar characteristics, not as much projected demand in the future. Focus our attentions more on the areas that we know there's going to be a lot of growth, there's going to be a lot of management, a lot of coordination on. So just question, comment, wasn't sure, because we discussed it in the past. I haven't really heard it at all being mentioned as we've started this cycle, so I just wasn't sure where staff was at with that and if the consultants had any opinion or feedback. So.
Yeah, at this point, I don't think we have a clear answer.
Okay.
Our approach to this is to prioritize Melody Hill and Cascade View, and touch on the other sub-areas.
Yeah.
In terms of the housing analysis and land use, and just looking at it more holistically.
Sure.
But that's something that we can look into.
Yeah, and I just threw Gateway out there as an example because I know in the past that we for sure have had those conversations, but because we are talking about, this process will be addressing Melody Hill and Cascade View, this would be the perfect opportunity to address the sizes of those sub-areas now and whether or not we want to, make them smaller and more neighborhood focused. Kind of gets into the whole neighborhood identity anyway. But, with these sub-areas being so large, there isn't really much relation from one end to the other.
Can we go back to the map? So, looking at what you're saying, the sub-areas of Cascade View are the 2 circles at the top, and then Melody Hill is to the left of the big circle that's been drawn at I-5 and 220th. Yeah. I agree with you on the size of the sub-areas. Like, I think if we were doing this from scratch, what we would do is we would establish like a maximum size for a sub-area, like based on a half-mile walking radius, kind of divide up the towns into those and try to make a little node somewhere in there.
More like an urban village.
Yeah, like a series of urban
Administrative
villages.
district.
And I think that's what we're trying to do here. There's obviously some missing corners of the town, like the far east side that is down there near Terrace View Park, and then up by Matt Hervella Park. And sorry, I'm going with a bunch of parks because that's my understanding of the reference. But you can kind of see the gaps in the yellow, right? And then, like, I think those areas, like, I would like to see what happens if we sort of carpet the town with these sort of commercial walk shed nodes. Like, if we're trying to move away from cars, and I think we should be, because with that many people, like, you know, people are still obviously going to own cars, but like they can't drive them for every single thing. And these little corners of the town, they're having to drive them for every single thing, which I think is what you're saying too, right? Yeah. So I don't know if this is like an opportunity to like say what I think the map should look like for growth alternative 3, but I think having a viable little, like, everyone within walking distance of a viable little neighborhood center is one of those things that, you know, if we were doing it correctly, we should be able to do. You know, whether we can do that in the constraints of this project, I think is an open question. But I think this starts to approach that. I think it would be cool if it were a little bit more formalized. The other thing that you mentioned is the possible future 220th station, and I think that might be what that circle at I-5 and 220th is. Right now, like, I think, you know, it's a very car-centric way of experiencing the city, right? Like, it obviously makes sense that you have the node at the freeway interchange, but like from a car standpoint, but I don't think we have space for those cars. I think that speaks a lot to the potential of the 220th Street interchange. And I think one thing I'd like to think about is, like, you know, if the 220th station gets built versus if it doesn't get built, what can it reasonably support? Like, if we put another town center there, it makes obvious sense. You could do like a town center, right? Like, it's got the light rail, it can support all these people who don't live with cars. If that doesn't get built, I think then the development potential of that area that is sustainable looks a little bit different. I think something can happen there because there's, like, if you drive down 220th, there's like an emerging little corridor, like there's a few businesses that are kind of on the south side and the north side, and like, I think it could be a really nice neighborhood. But I think the question of, like, the question I have is A, what can it support with each of those conditions, and then B, what do we need to do to make them build a 220th Street station? Like, if we say we're going to provide all this development, but it will provide this much more development if you build the 220th Street station, like, is that some kind of leverage we can get to get that station built? So I think it might be worthwhile to, like, look at a couple of alternatives, because we're surrounded, like, you know, the Cascade View and the Melody Hill neighborhoods are surrounding that. They're all touching, like, different corners of that because of the way we've drawn the sub areas. But you know, that might be a question as we're moving forward, like a couple of different options depending on whether the station is there or not, and then that builds the case for the station, which I think there's already a good one, right? Like, there's a bunch of apartments, there's a corporate headquarters, like, they should build it, but that's my opinion.
Comes down to not necessarily political will on our part, because, you know, us and our neighboring jurisdictions were advocating for it. It's how much strength we have. Strength is based off of, you know, political power, and when you're a smaller population city, you don't have that, as opposed to one council member in Seattle who was able to threaten.
So we need is 300,000 people in Mountlake Terrace, and we need to zone for that in 20 years.
Yeah. I will say, you know, it is nice, though, you know, as we're talking about the growth and anticipation of stations, that we're finally paying attention to the west side of I-5 where the transit station is, because we even had previous planning commissioners who were kind of dumbfounded that we were ignoring that area and felt that was a missed opportunity. Now, granted, you know, the housing, it's all single-family housing right now, The connections to 236 a little bit difficult because of topography, but everything can change, public stairways, areaways, that kind of stuff. Who knows what the future holds? So it's nice that, that's at least being identified on the map now. The only other comment that I'll bring up before I forget is that, and I've brought this up many times over the years, is the rebranding of certain sub-areas, specifically Cascade View. I will state it again. This sub-area has not had that name very long. At the time, it was city staff threw together a couple of names. That was the one that got picked. Wasn't necessarily picked by Planning Commission. And at the time, I don't think anybody was really aware, unless you were really into neighborhoods all in the region, that there's already a neighborhood with that name in Snohomish County. I think it's really important when we come to neighborhood identity, neighborhood branding, that Mountlake Terrace be very unique. And having a generic neighborhood name that repeats itself in the county already maybe isn't the best way of going about that. One could even say that for Gateway. Everybody who's on the county line wants to use Gateway. It pops up at least one more time. I think either Bothell, Woodinville, it's not unique. So, but we're not talking about Gateway tonight. We are talking about Cascade View because that's a sub area we're working on. That is definitely something that I will expect us to circle back to and have that opportunity to address that issue moving forward, to have that name changed as part of this sub area process. So just putting it on the radar for staff, not a request, but a reminder that that's an expectation.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? All right.
Actually, just maybe one more, just for a clarification though. So would, because we've kind of had some input on, on the maps between, what 2 is currently and what 3 is. Would there be, after kind of synthesizing our comments, would there be like a revision to 2, like maybe a 2A? Or would it still just be no, 2 would be this map, 3 would be that map, and there isn't an in between?
Yeah, so the purpose of today is to sort of confirm the growth alternatives framework that we came up with. But there will be further opportunity to provide additional input. And so we'll take what we've heard today, sort of refine these alternatives. The goal is that there's a preferred alternative that we identify. We're not ready at this point to state what the preferred alternative is, but that's something that will come out of the process with working with CPAG, working with you, Planning Commission, and bringing those recommendations to City Council.
And it's possible that there might be even other areas that we think 2 could be expanded on, but maybe not necessarily, I'm not trying to put words in everybody's mouth, where maybe, I don't want to say 3 is a bridge too far, but maybe we're not ready for 3, but we definitely are ready for more than 2.
Sure.
But those weren't necessarily verbalized tonight.
Right. Yeah.
There might be other opportunity to, discuss that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't see why we can't.
And I'm not necessarily that 3 is a bridge too far. I'm just saying, that's a lot of circles. It's a lot of circles, and knowing this city and knowing the neighborhood, it's like, again, it gets back to that targeted growth. And does it really make sense to think about, putting that growth in areas where we're not reducing our carbon footprint, these growth goals that we have. Plus, when we cram more growth onto the lots and everybody's still driving, where are they parking these cars? Yeah. Obviously, we want them to not have cars, but you put them in those parts of the city, you're going to need a car. So it's logistics, it's infrastructure, it's everything.
Yeah.
It's all tied in.
So just a quick question for the commission. Is there the desire, I guess, to add an additional circle to alternative 2 that says as part of our sort of let's meet the growth targets that we do evaluate some sort of change in and around that sort of 220th interchange area, or are we okay with sort of evaluating the existing nodes as part of our meeting growth alternatives alternative and evaluating more of the expansion as part of alt 3? I think that's the one distinction that it would be great to sort of get a more of a direction on tonight.
Well, I know, because I brought it up, I know at the CPEG meeting, both of the groups, when they got split up in two, both had mentioned, that area.
Sure.
And to be honest, I was kind of surprised, because that's always been in the back of my mind for years, and, to see kind of two independent groups kind of, come to that same idea as well. Two, I bring it up because that node would also include the west side of 220th, or the west side of the freeway, and, that's a commercial node that I'm sure is going to, we're going to be talking about a lot as we are updating Melody Hills sub-area plan, and I'm sure it's going to include, more intense mixed-use development there as well. So it's like, we're already going to be talking about it. That growth is probably going to be happening. Just, to me, it makes sense to have that node there already. But
Yeah.
I'm not sure how other people think about that.
I think it's a line. I think 220th is more, like, we've kind of drawn them in circles, but I think 220th is a line. It's already existing. If you're talking about growing areas around existing commercial nodes, you would include 220th. It's already like, kind of, developed. It's got apartments and stuff there, but it is like, disco era zoning, like you drove your AMC Pacer from your house behind the strip mall out to the front of the strip mall. And so I think that needs an update, and Melody Hill sub-area is doing that. And so that would be, we're already looking at Cascade View kind of on the north over there. So it would fit in with the framework of that. I think regardless of, I think the question between alternative 2 and alternative 3 is how far does that go? And in my mind also, what happens with the 220th station? Because I think the with and without the 220th station is two different designs.
Yeah. And again, just for probably discussion's sake, these are nice, perfect little circles on our map.
Yeah.
But in reality, they're, some of these areas are going to be more like blobs and oblongs and stretched a little here, tucked a little there, a little bit of cosmetic surgery.
I think it was like a half mile on either side of 220th on the west side of the interstate, because you've got the retail there. And so thinking like that will give you the opportunity to, like, further down the line, talk about, connections and what does 220th look like, and how does, like, the people who live there, like, what does the future of the area around the main street look like? East of 220th, maybe a bit as well. I think that's an open question that alternatives will look at, so.
Yeah.
Sierra, I think one of the things from staff's perspective or my perspective for alternative 2 is I think the CPEG and others have expressed kind of buy-in for more linear connection along major transportation corridors for alternative 2, and I don't really see that. It's on 3 in one part, but from where Cedar Plaza goes up to Cascade View and along 220th, where we've talked about zoning along those major transportation corridors, I think what I see is those discussions missing in this map.
I think that's great feedback, Christy, and I think we can regroup on how to make sure this map is updated for Alt 2 based on the feedback from Planning Commission and from CPAC. I think that's getting at, I think that the purpose of Alt 2, again, just as we put this together, is where to target some of those zoning changes to get us past that deficit. So as we start looking at, maybe we do add a little bit more along 220th, maybe we do add some of those corridors along here. we will, I guess, run the numbers and sort of get at sort of, how much is that adding to capacity in the city, and sort of where are we hitting our sweet spot, and is there a desire to sort of go a little bit above and beyond that based on, the community's desire for the future.
Yeah, I also think we can vary densities as we're in those areas, particularly maybe some higher densities nearer to the light rail station, and then maybe less so. So there's some ways that we can, I think, shape those densities based on growth targets and jobs. But to me, it's really getting at something that Chair Batista said, and also looking at job numbers as well as transportation corridors are going to be, I think, extremely important as we're planning densities, particularly increased densities, much like we're doing around the light rail station, but also in other areas of the city with or without a transitional station. We're going to have major transportation corridors that's going to have connections for buses and other things too. So we can't forget that in addition to just light rail, I think is important.
Sorry, I just saw one thing with alternative 2 that gave me a question that's somewhat related. You're talking about expanding RST in the walk shed of the light rail station? So we would just rezone that entire area for townhouses?
That is one of the assumptions. I think there's also looking at what is the future of the RST zone. Is it just townhomes, or as we're looking at some of the state requirements and some of the best practices on middle housing, is it more than just townhomes?
I think, Commissioner Betcher, the existing RST zone will be no longer. I mean, that's kind of now, I think, with missing middle and other things that we need to, talk about, and a variety of housing types, there really shouldn't be a zone that allows one thing. That's kind of crazy.
I agree.
Okay, so you're reading
Yes.
my mind.
Okay, good.
I have these maps marked up, but I'm questioning, So
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, and I
we
think,
need to-
with your comment about development along major corridors as well, I think I have the concern of, putting the most people in the cheapest housing on the loudest places with the most traffic that they're not even generating. And so I think looking at what that development is also is part of this process too.
Yeah, I would say, particularly for townhomes, I don't know if I call townhomes affordable housing based on the cost of them. So I think we need to expand how we're thinking and what we're allowing to be more than definitely how we've zoned in the past, right? And so I think absolutely that's up for discussion, because we certainly don't want to be, in that mode of just only right here and, getting that strip stuff. I want to, I think that, definitely approach around commercial neighborhood nodes and those other things are extremely important. So we are capturing that, but what does that look like for connectivity? I think that's, our next big question in some of these areas as well.
So I've got sort of 2 points, one kind of circling back on one of Christie's comments and, an observation. And it kind of was getting to what I was talking about, maybe scooching out the radius a little bit to include the areas that are missed. A real thing, an important thing to remember, and obviously as residents we're aware of it, staff's aware of it, but consultants, I don't know how much time you take a look at, our street infrastructure, but, radiuses are good because it's as the crow flies, but in reality, the walking distance is a lot longer. Unfortunately, Mountlake Terrace is burned with a non-gridded street layout for most of its areas. So the distance to get just to the arterial or to the commercial node is quite a bit longer than what the crow fly would suggest.
Sure.
And so having sort of that infill, smaller commercial node development, in the interim between the larger nodes would help out, because that would increase the walk shed for people who are kind of stuck in no man's land to still have walkable access to certain services.
Sure.
If that's just something simple like like a small restaurant or a
Jean's grocery store.
yeah,
Sure. Yeah, I get you. Like a
just
little neighborhood area.
Smaller businesses, maybe a small commercial operation, or something. Who knows what? But it's something that gets them out of the house and gives them, when attraction breeds attraction. So if there's one thing there that is attractive for somebody to walk to, odds are somebody else is going to want to locate another thing there. And next thing you know, you have, and I'm not going to use vibrant because I hate buzzwords, but you are going to have
A vibrant, holistic neighborhood?
a transformation of that area that draws in people. Let's dance around the term. The other point that I wanted to make, kind of circling on Commissioner Betcher's comment, he's like, are we expanding the RST zone? We're expanding everything here. So I think, even though we just talked about the town center recently, that we should revisit having, some of that dense development extend a little further east on 236. I've even had other commissioners ask me recently, why didn't we think about going a little bit further east on 236 with our town center plan? And I explained to them, well, we actually did for a part of it and got threatened with a lawsuit, so we had to backpedal real quick. But I think everything is reopened for discussion. And I think, having, that dense mixed use development, just being located right next to the existing zone for dense, mixed use development makes the logical sense of it being on, especially being on that, being as big of a transportation corridor that it is. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. I think we should revisit that. Lawsuit be damned, because I played nice on that, but I really think that was a missed opportunity. Not to bore you guys, but the development was already vested. Nothing that we were changing was going to affect their project, but it gave them the opportunity to rethink what they were doing and embrace the vision that we kind of been talking about tonight for that part of the town. But instead, they decided to hit us with public disclosure requests and show up with lawyers. So anyway, past is the past, but time to revisit.
All right, so sounds like we'll go back to the drawing board with alternative 2, make some updates based on what we heard today. Before I move forward, were there any changes proposed for alternative 3, or is it fine the way it is?
You mean you want more circles?
I think,
How about including future potential incorporated areas that are currently outside of our mandated area? Like maybe a little bit north and a little bit east?
so, I don't totally understand what the circles mean here, right? Like, this is a very housing-centered discussion, but I think, when we're moving beyond this, we're talking about, like, building new commercial nodes or building new, like, centers of activity or something, right? It doesn't have to be, like, entirely commercial. Like, you could build, like, a promenade along the power lines at Terrace Ridge Park or something. Like, I don't know, whatever it is. But I do think it would be worthwhile. I don't know if there's budget for it. But I would love to see an alternative where we carpet the entire town with like these, it doesn't even have to be developed in the next 20 years, but I think we need to be thinking about creating like central areas where the entire town is carpeted with these, roughly half-mile walking radiuses or whatever. So we're not leaving people in areas of the town out of like, actually having a good neighborhood, but they're still stuck like dependent on their cars and then driving through these places that, they now have to drive through that have way more people. That's something that I would like to see. I don't know how feasible it is, but.
Well, I know it's, in one of the CPEG meetings, there was the talk about wanting to see better connectivity between, the different parts of the city, because we're kind of constrained by natural topography and infrastructure.
Yeah.
And there's got to be a better way to bridge those to really connect this city.
Yeah.
And so I know they discussed it at the meeting. I'm not sure if that should be included as part of these alternatives, or if that's, something separate, a different part of the comp plan where that would appear. But since you kind of brought that up,
So I think the vision statement, and sorry, I know we're getting at 10 o'clock here, but if I were to make a vision statement for this, it would be that everyone lives within the walking distance of a neighborhood center that has central things and a little plaza or park or something, and those centers are all connected by, infrastructure they can get around without a car very comfortably, whether that's bike paths or, buses or whatever. Like, I think that, would make the town work much better. And then, that's, I don't think I said it in one breath, but I could probably rework that to be said in one breath. And so I think this starts to approach that, but there's some gaps in there. And of course, this is imagining each of those as I guess there's a new node at 220th, which, is starting to emerge. It kind of makes sense. I don't know about the yellow circles. Maybe that's just more people living there. They can't walk to places. But I think these two things go hand in hand, not just the number of houses, but also what they look like and what is being serviced. It can't be looked at. It can be analyzed in isolation, but it can't necessarily be looked at in isolation, if that makes sense. Which is why I ask also about housing for businesses.
Yeah, everything's interconnected.
Just checking one more time. Anybody else have any kind of comments? I know some of us feel like we sort of dominated the conversation tonight. It's not my goal or intent, so I just want to make sure. Anybody got any other comments or? No. Okay. It sounds like this, this is going to be coming back to us anyway, so we'll have more opportunity to speak. So.
All right, well, to close us out, unless Sierra, do you have anything else to add?
No, I do not. It's been a great conversation tonight. It's interesting to hear just how forward-thinking this group is, and looking forward to refreshing some of these maps and bringing back, doing the analysis and bringing back some of our findings. And especially, I think, as we talk to the sub-areas, next time we meet, we'll be able to further along some of the questions and conversations we've had here tonight.
All right. Just to wrap us up, to revisit the slide that Sierra previously presented. So our upcoming meeting, so on February 12th, we'll have a sub-areas workshop. Logistically, it'll be us around the table with our consultants sort of notating live on, so that's available online.
I'm just curious, will that be similar to what the CPEG workshops were, where we're going to have a map and we're going to be able to draw on it? And
I think we're still discussing what that looks like, but from what I understand, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
more interactive.
More interactive, for
Okay.
sure. And then also, I guess less hands-on, since we'll be confined to the table, but it's more collaboration and live note-taking. Yeah.
Do you have big rolls of trace?
Sorry?
Do you have big rolls of trace paper?
I don't think we do, no.
But we could get some, do you mean to overlay on maps and such?
Yeah, if you want to
Yeah.
work through different alternatives. Or
Yeah,
whatever.
or just
Maybe that could
even
be-
that's a good
copying
idea.
over, yeah, absolutely. We can do that.
We can bring Trace as well, as the providing the time maps materials for the meeting. But I think that our question was just how to make sure that the meeting and the workshop works for the commission and also works as an open public meeting,
Right.
with the online component.
Yeah. And then we'll also just have an ongoing discussion on housing and land use, sort of perhaps revisit some of the things discussed today and sort of move this topic forward. So that way, by March 11th, we have some draft goals that we can walk through for the land use, housing, and economic vitality element. And then as we move further along, our goal is to have a draft plan by July 8th. And then Planning Commission recommendations to City Council by August 12th. That way they can start their formal review and adoption process.
So that only gives potentially 2 meetings for the planning commission to discuss?
These are the structured modules. It's understood that there may be a need for additional meetings in between these. So perhaps at another meeting during the same month to continue to have these conversations. So I think as we move the project further along and we see what might be required, we can talk about adding additional meetings that we can present at and sort of further the discussions.
Gotcha. Because I know, obviously we've experienced recently, it's one thing to have a really long meeting to talk about stuff, but some things need extra time after comments are made or
Absolutely.
things are observed. And so you can't really solve that and just, we'll tack on another hour to this meeting because it may take
Well, and
several
we
days
all,
worth of research and,
absolutely, we also have, 2 planning commission meetings a month, so we have time within these months to do additional work, and I fully anticipate that that's what we're going to need to do. So by the time we have a full draft plan, you guys have actually worked on each planning element.
Yeah.
You're not getting it like, here you go, and you're like, what the heck?
We're
Yeah.
budgeting 1 meeting for the draft plan, but of course, there might be an additional meeting to refine recommendations, have a final draft plan that then gets forwarded to city council.
Okay.
Anything else? So, February 7th, we'll be meeting with CPAG. February 8th, we have a council meeting to discuss, I believe, the same topics that we discussed today. And then February 12th, again, our next planning commission briefing with you. And something to put out there as a reflection, some feedback that we would like is, in terms of the level of detail of these briefings, is this enough detail? Would you like to see more detail, maybe more defined information?
I love to look at numbers, but I'm guessing, given the nature of how these things develop, this is probably the detail there is. So if we have questions about things like where the numbers came from for ADUs, I
Sure.
think it's worth digging into that, but it's not necessary to go into it in great detail unless maybe we have questions.
Right. I guess my intention is not that we're talking at you, that we're having a collaborative conversation and really providing the detail ahead of time. That way you have time to digest and come to these meetings ready to discuss.
How's everybody else feel? Fine with the level of detail, but would like a little bit more, or just leave it as is, or neutral on the opinion?
I think the level of detail has been great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let us know, as we roll through, and just, as we approach each one, we can
Hopefully we won't
refine.
go past 10 p.m. All right. Well,
This
that's
used to be a regular occurrence for our meetings, so.
that's all we have for today. Yeah.
All right, so hearing that, we'll go ahead and move on. But actually, before getting to item number 8, I promised we'd circle back around to see, since we kind of did our director's report out of order. I get the feeling the answer is no, but I just want to double check. Does anybody have any kind of further questions for our planning director that normally would have been covered in director's report that have come up since she talked earlier tonight? Not?
Earlier, I feel like I heard a request for a statement saying that hate speech is bad. How do we go about that?
I guess we could talk about that now before we get to miscellaneous business. I was thinking that if the motion wanted to be made, it could be made during miscellaneous business, or rather than sort of just doing kind of an off-the-cuff motion, if some sort of statement is within the wishes of the planning commission, but would like it to be a little bit more formal, maybe allow staff to maybe draft, some verbiage, position statement or whatever, and then we can take it up at the next meeting and vote on it then. So I'm open to either way. It just, something, I guess I should say, something of this significance and importance, especially with what we dealt with in the last meeting. If we are to go that route, maybe we would want something a little bit more formal drafted, but I'll leave it up to my fellow planning commissioners, how they feel on it. One, if they think the statement, they should even do a statement. Two, should we just do something, I don't want to say off the cuff, but, something a little bit more informal right now? Or do we want something a little bit more formalized that can be drafted and we can address at the next meeting?
I mean, I'd be happy to see something a little more formal, but I don't want to add more to staff's docket. I know y'all have got a lot coming up.
Did you guys see the statement that was released prior by the city? Any comments on that of maybe something like that or something different, or was it?
I will admit, I did not see.
Okay.
An email that we got or something?
I think it was news.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
no,
and it was also put on social media.
Yeah, I saw it on social media.
Okay, so that statement that was released, just curious.
Is it on the website as well?
I'm not sure.
I'm not a big social media person, but
Okay,
at least every other week I'm on the website. So.
If you'd like, I can send that out tomorrow. I have a link to the Facebook page in which was posted.
Okay. And then I guess maybe, so staff's prepared ahead of time if, I guess in this case, we probably should follow proper communication between commissioners and staff members. Just reply to the email that you get and just saying, yeah, something like this is good, or I'd like to see that. That way, the city can aggregate those comments and then either just kind of come up with the same statement for us for the next meeting, or
Okay.
or maybe something a little bit different.
right.
All right, so now we'll go ahead and move on to item number 8, or maybe 8.5, miscellaneous business by call of planning commissioners. Does anybody have any other miscellaneous business? Any vacations coming up? Not hearing or seeing any, so. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move on to item number 9, which is adjournment. So I'll go ahead and declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Good discussion.